She was sold before she could speak, but tonight she'll burn it all down. They called her the perfect daughter, the flawless bride. The sacrificial lamb wrapped in silk and diamonds. Elara Vance had been groomed since childhood for one purpose: to be handed over to the most feared man in the kingdom, the Alpha King, a monster cloaked in legend and blood. But on the night before her chains were meant to lock forever, she did the unthinkable. She ran, and in running, she shattered everything. This is her story, a story of defiance, deception, and a love forged in the fires of survival. Stay until the end. You won't believe what happens next. And if this grips you the way it gripped me, hit that like button and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Let's dive in. The Vance estate had never been a home. It was a stage, a gilded theater where every word was scripted, every gesture rehearsed, and every smile measured for maximum effect. Elara Vance had learned the choreography before she could read. Bow your head, soften your voice, never question, never resist. She was the youngest of 3 daughters and the only one who mattered, not because she was loved, because she was useful. Her father, Lord Matthias Vance, was a man built of ambition and calculation. His wealth came from trade contracts and backroom deals with the royal court, but his true currency was influence. And influence, in the ruthless world of noble politics, required leverage. Elara was that leverage. Her eldest sister, Celeste, had been married off to a southern duke at 16. Her middle sister, Isabel, had been traded to a general twice her age. Both transactions had secured land, titles, military alliances. Both had been celebrated as strategic unions. Elara had always known her turn would come. She just hadn't known who she'd be sold to until 3 months ago. It was a winter morning when her father summoned her to his study. The fire crackled low, casting long shadows across the dark wood paneling and the rows of ledgers that lined the shelves like gravestones. He didn't look up when she entered. Sit. She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap the way she'd been taught. Silence stretched between them, thick and cold. Finally, he spoke. You're to be married. Her heart didn't skip. She'd been expecting this. To whom, father? The Alpha King. The words landed like a blade between her ribs. The Alpha King. The name alone was a curse whispered in shadows. A man, if he could even be called that, who ruled the northern territories with an iron fist and a reputation soaked in blood. They said he was mad, that he tore through enemies with his bare hands, that his court was a graveyard of those who dared displease him. And now she was being given to him. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Her father's eyes snapped to hers, cold and sharp. Because it secures our family's position for the next century. Because the king requested you specifically. Because you will do as you're told. But there is no but, Elara. His voice was ice. You've been raised for this. You know your duty. Duty. The word tasted like ash. She wanted to scream, to demand why she had to be the sacrifice, to ask if he'd ever once seen her as a daughter instead of a commodity. But she didn't. She nodded, smiled, thanked him for the honor. And when she left that room, something inside her began to crack. Ma. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. Seamstresses measured her for gowns she'd never chosen. Tutors drilled her on etiquette for a court she'd never wanted to enter. Her mother, a ghost of a woman who'd long ago surrendered her own will, fussed over her hair, her posture, her smile, as if perfecting the wrapping paper on a gift no one wanted. No one asked Elara how she felt. No one cared. She was a piece on a board being moved into position. At night, alone in her room, she stared out the window at the forest beyond the estate walls. She'd never been allowed past the gates unsupervised. The world outside was dangerous, her father always said. Uncivilized. Brutal. But lately, she'd begun to wonder if the real danger was the one wearing a crown. The Alpha King's envoy arrived 1 week before the wedding. He was a tall, severe man named Corvin, with eyes like flint and a voice that cut through the grand hall like a whip. He carried a single message. The king would arrive in 6 days to claim his bride. The ceremony would proceed as planned. There would be no delays, no negotiations. Elara stood beside her father as Corvin spoke, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. When the envoy's gaze fell on her, she felt it like a physical weight. He looked at her the way one might appraise livestock. "She's acceptable," he said finally, as if she weren't standing right there. Her father beamed. "The king will be pleased." That night, Elara didn't sleep. She sat at her window watching the moon rise over the dark trees and felt the crack inside her widen into a chasm. She thought of Celeste, who'd written exactly twice in 5 years, both letters cold and formal, scrubbed of anything real. She thought of Isabel, who'd stopped writing altogether. She thought of the Alpha King, waiting in his fortress of stone and blood, ready to claim her like a prize. And she thought, I can't do this. The realization was quiet, almost gentle, but it was absolute. The plan formed slowly, desperately, over the next 3 days. She couldn't simply refuse. Her father would lock her in her room until the wedding. She couldn't appeal to her mother, who had long ago traded her spine for survival. She couldn't run to her sisters. They were too far away, too entrenched in their own cages. She had no allies, no resources, no training for the world outside these walls. But she had one thing, the knowledge that a gilded cage was still a cage, and she would rather die free than live chained. On the 4th night, she began to gather what little she could. A cloak, a small bag, a few coins stolen from her mother's jewelry box, a knife from the kitchens, thin and sharp. She didn't know where she'd go, didn't know how she'd survive, but she knew she couldn't stay. The night before the wedding, the estate was a hive of activity. Servants rushed through the halls, preparing for the arrival of the king and his retinue. Musicians rehearsed in the ballroom. Cooks labored over elaborate dishes. Her mother wept with what Elara assumed was joy, but might have been relief. No one noticed when she slipped away. She moved through the corridors like a shadow, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a scream. Every distant voice made her freeze. But she made it to the servants' entrance, and she ran. The forest swallowed her whole. The night was bitter cold, the kind that bit through fabric and skin and settled in your bones. The trees loomed like giants, their branches clawing at the sky. She stumbled over roots and rocks, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her hands scraped and bleeding. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to get away. Behind her, faint but growing louder, she heard the shouts. They'd discovered her absence. They were coming. Panic clawed at her throat. She pushed herself harder, faster, ignoring the burning in her lungs and the sharp sting of branches against her face. And then, she broke through the trees into a clearing and saw him. He was sitting by a low fire, half hidden in the shadows. A man, broad-shouldered and still, his face obscured by the brim of a worn hat. A traveler, maybe. A drifter. The kind of person her father would have had thrown off the estate on sight. He looked up as she stumbled into the firelight, and their eyes met. His were dark, unreadable, dangerous. "Please," she gasped, the word tearing out of her. "Please, I need—" Behind her, the shouts grew louder. Torches flickered through the trees. The man stood slowly, his gaze shifting from her to the approaching search party. When he looked back at her, there was something unreadable in his expression. "What are you running from?" His voice was low, rough, like gravel underfoot. "Everything," she whispered. He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded toward the darkness beyond the fire. "Then run faster." "I can't," her voice cracked. "They'll find me. They'll drag me back. I'll be—" She choked on the words. "I'll be given to the Alpha King." Something flickered in his eyes, too fast to name. "And you'd rather die than marry him?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. The man was silent. The firelight played across his face, revealing sharp features, a scar along his jaw, eyes that had seen too much. Finally he spoke. "There's one way to make sure they can't take you back." Hope flared, desperate and reckless. "What?" "Bond with someone else. Tonight, before they reach you." Her breath caught. "Bond?" "An alpha bond. It's permanent, unbreakable. Once it's done, no other alpha can claim you. Not even a king." She stared at him, her mind racing. She knew what he was talking about. The ancient rituals, the magic woven into bloodlines, the way alphas could tie themselves to their mates through a bond deeper than marriage. It was irreversible. She swallowed hard. I don't even know your name. Kael. The shouts were closer now. She could hear her father's voice, sharp and furious, cutting through the night. She looked at Kael, at this stranger with dangerous eyes and a scar like a warning, and she made her choice. Do it. He didn't move. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. Her voice was steady now, forged in desperation. I'm asking you to save me from a fate worse than death. I'm asking you to make me free. This isn't freedom. His tone was hard. This is trading one cage for another. Then it's my cage, my choice. For a moment, he just looked at her. Then he exhaled, slow and deliberate. You'll regret this. I already regret everything else. The torches were visible now through the trees, 30 seconds, maybe less. Kael stepped closer. The firelight carved shadows across his face. Last chance to change your mind. She lifted her chin. Do it. He reached out, and his hand closed around her wrist. His touch was warm, rough, electric. She felt the hum of something ancient and powerful stirring in the space between them. This will hurt, he warned. I don't care. He pulled her closer, his other hand moving to the back of her neck. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a split second she saw something raw and almost regretful in their depths. Then he bit down. But pain exploded through her, sharp, searing, all-consuming. She gasped, her body arching against him as the bond took hold. It felt like lightning in her veins, like her very soul was being rewritten. And then, just as suddenly, the pain shifted into something else. Warmth. Connection. A thread of gold weaving itself between them, binding them together in a way she couldn't explain but could feel down to her marrow. When he pulled back, she was breathing hard, trembling. The mark on her neck burned, but it was done. She was bonded, to him, to a stranger. The search party burst into the clearing seconds later. Her father was at the front, his face twisted with fury. Guards flanked him, weapons drawn. Behind them, Corvin, the king's envoy, stood watching with cold, calculating eyes. Elara! Her father's voice was a roar. What have you done? She stepped back, instinctively moving closer to Kael. Her hand went to her neck, to the mark that now branded her. I made a choice, she said quietly. Her father's gaze snapped to Kael. Who are you? What have you done to my daughter? Kael said nothing. He just stood there, calm and unmoved, his eyes locked on Corvin. The envoy stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Is it done? Kael's jaw tightened. It's done. Corvin's gaze flicked to Elara, to the mark on her neck, and something dark passed over his face. Then the king will be, displeased. The king, Kael said flatly, can handle his own disappointment. For a moment, the clearing was utterly silent. Then her father lunged forward. This is an outrage. She belongs to the Alpha King. You've stolen. She belongs to no one, Kael cut him off, his voice like iron. Not anymore. The guards shifted, uncertain. Corvin raised a hand, stopping them. This changes things, the envoy said slowly. The contract is void, Kael finished. She's bonded to me. There's no undoing it. You know the law. Corvin stared at him for a long, tense moment. Then, to Elara's shock, he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. So be it, he said softly. But know this, Drifter. The king does not forgive insults lightly, and taking what was promised to him, that's more than an insult. He turned to the guards. We leave at dawn. There's nothing more to be done here. Her father sputtered, red-faced and furious. You can't just... She's my daughter. She has a duty. She had a duty, Corvin corrected coldly. Now she has a bond, and that, Lord Vance, supersedes even royal contracts. He swept from the clearing without another word, the guards following. Her father turned on Elara, his face a mask of rage and betrayal. You've ruined us. Do you understand? You've destroyed everything. She met his gaze, and for the first time in her life, she didn't flinch. No, father. I saved myself. He stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a dying fish. Then he spun on his heel and stormed back toward the estate, leaving her standing in the clearing with the stranger she'd just bound herself to. When they were alone, the silence felt heavier than the chaos that had preceded it. Elara looked at Kyle, really looked at him for the first time since the bond had snapped into place. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, somewhere between wary and resigned. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he nodded toward the forest beyond the fire. "Now you survive." "That's it?" "That's everything." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how cold the night was, how alone she was, despite the bond humming between them. "Where will we go?" "Wherever we need to." He turned, kicking dirt over the fire. "You wanted freedom. This is what it looks like." It didn't look like freedom. It looked like darkness and uncertainty and a future she couldn't begin to imagine. But it was hers, and that, she realized, was enough. They walked through the night. Kyle moved through the forest like he'd been born to it, silent, efficient, always aware of their surroundings. Elara struggled to keep up, her fine dress snagging on branches, her soft shoes offering no protection against the rough ground. He didn't slow down, didn't offer help, didn't speak. After an hour, she stumbled, her ankle twisting on a root. She hit the ground hard, biting back a cry. Kyle stopped, looked back at her. "Get up." She glared at him through the pain. "I'm trying. Try harder." Fury sparked in her chest. "I've just fled my entire life, bonded with a complete stranger and been disowned by my family. Forgive me if I'm not moving fast enough for you." He walked back to her, crouched down so they were eye level. "Out here," he said quietly, "no one cares about your tragic backstory. Predators don't stop because you're tired. Cold doesn't ease up because you're noble-born. You want to survive? You move, or you die. Choose." His words were harsh, but his eyes, there was something in them that wasn't cruelty. It was truth. She swallowed hard, then pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the throb in her ankle. "I choose to move." He nodded once. "Good." And they kept walking. By the time dawn broke, they'd reached a small, rundown cabin deep in the woods. It looked abandoned, walls half-rotted, roof sagging, windows dark and empty. Kyle pushed open the door and gestured for her to enter. Inside it was cold and sparse, a single room with a broken chair, a lopsided table, and a fireplace choked with old ash. "Home sweet home," Kyle muttered, dropping his pack by the door. Elara looked around, exhaustion weighing on her like a stone. "How long are we staying?" "Until it's safe to move." "And when will that be?" He shot her a look. "When I say so." She wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, explanations, some semblance of control, but she was too tired. She sank onto the floor in the corner, pulling her cloak tight around her, and closed her eyes. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was the sound of Kyle rebuilding the fire. When she woke, the sun was high, and Kyle was gone. Panic spiked through her. She scrambled to her feet, her heart racing. Had he left her? Abandoned her in this rotting cabin in the middle of nowhere? Then the door opened, and he walked in, carrying firewood and something wrapped in cloth. He glanced at her. "You're awake." "You left." "I went to get supplies." He dropped the wood by the fireplace, then tossed the cloth bundle to her. "Eat." She unwrapped it to find bread, dried meat, and an apple. Her stomach clenched with hunger. "Thank you," she said softly. He didn't respond, just started stacking the wood. She ate in silence, watching him work. He moved with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice. No wasted motion, no hesitation. "How long have you been out here?" she asked. "Long enough." "That's not an answer." He paused, glancing over his shoulder. "You want my life story, princess? Because I don't owe you one." The word princess was delivered like an insult. She bristled. "My name is Elara." "I know." "Then use it." He turned back to the fire. "Elara." The way he said it, flat, devoid of warmth, made something in her chest tighten. She finished her meal in silence. But the days that followed were brutal. Kyle pushed her relentlessly. He taught her how to move quietly through the forest, how to start a fire, how to gut a fish. He made her haul water from a freezing stream, chop wood until her hands blistered, and keep watch through the long, dark hours of the night. She failed, constantly, and he never let her forget it. "You're too slow. You're too loud. You're going to get yourself killed." Every correction was delivered with the same cold precision. Every failure met with the same impatient glare. She wanted to scream at him, to throw something, to demand why he was being so cruel. But she didn't, because beneath the harshness, she was learning. She was getting stronger, and somewhere, buried deep, she suspected he knew that too. One night as they sat by the fire, she finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her. "Why did you help me?" He didn't look up from the blade he was sharpening. "I didn't. You bonded with me. You saved me from being dragged back. I gave you what you asked for. That's not the same as saving you." She frowned. "Then why do it at all?" For a long moment he was silent. The only sound was the rasp of the whetstone against steel. Finally, he spoke. "Because I know what it's like to be trapped." The words hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. She wanted to press, to ask what he meant, to understand the shadows that lived behind his eyes. But before she could, he stood, sheathing the blade. "Get some sleep. We move before dawn." And just like that, the moment was gone. 3 weeks into their new life, Elara began to notice things. The way Kael always positioned himself between her and danger. The way he checked the perimeter of their camp 3 times before settling in for the night. The way his gaze would sometimes linger on her when he thought she wasn't looking, not with desire, but with something heavier, something almost sad. And the way occasionally when she caught him off guard, she'd see a flicker of something in his expression that looked almost like regret. She didn't understand it, but she felt it, in the bond that hummed between them, in the strange, aching connection that tightened whenever he was near. She was beginning to realize that Kael wasn't just a stranger. He was a mystery, and she was starting to want to solve it. Ned. One morning she woke to find him standing at the edge of the clearing, staring out at the distant mountains. She approached quietly, stopping a few feet away. "What are you looking at?" He didn't turn. "The capital." She followed his gaze. Far in the distance, barely visible through the morning haze, she could see the dark silhouette of towers and walls, the seat of the Alpha King's power. "We're close," she said softly. "Too close." "Then why are we here?" He finally looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Because you need to see what you're running from." Before she could respond, he turned and walked back toward the cabin, leaving her standing alone, staring at the distant city and wondering what secrets it and he still held. The cabin became their world, 4 walls of rotting wood and silence that pressed in like a physical weight. Days bled into weeks, marked only by the rhythm of survival. Wake, train, eat, sleep, repeat. Elara's hands, once soft and carefully manicured, became rough with calluses. Her body, trained for ballrooms and tea ceremonies, learned the language of endurance. But the hardest lessons weren't physical. They were the ones Kael taught without speaking. Like the morning he handed her a bow and 3 arrows, then pointed to a deer grazing at the forest's edge. "We need food," he said simply. She stared at the weapon in her hands, then at the animal. "I've never—" "Then learn." "Kael, I can't just be—" "You can, or we go hungry." He crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "Your choice." She wanted to throw the bow at him, wanted to scream that this wasn't fair, that she'd never asked to become a hunter, a survivor, a woman who killed things to stay alive. But she'd made her choice the night she ran, and choices had consequences. She knocked the arrow with trembling fingers, drew back the string, and aimed. The deer lifted its head, ears twitching. For a moment their eyes met across the clearing. Then she released. The arrow went wide, disappearing into the underbrush. The deer bolted. Kael said nothing, just handed her another arrow. She tried again, and again, and again. By the time she finally hit her target, a rabbit, not the deer, the sun was setting and her arms felt like lead. When the small creature fell, she dropped the bow and turned away, her stomach churning. Kael picked up the rabbit, his movements efficient and practiced. You did well. I killed something. You fed us. It's not the same. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something flickered in his dark eyes. Out here, it is. That night, as they ate the rabbit she'd killed, Elara felt the last pieces of her old life crumble away. She wasn't a noble's daughter anymore, wasn't a bride-to-be, wasn't anyone's bargaining chip. She was just a woman trying to survive, and somehow that felt like both a loss and a victory. The bond between them was a constant presence, a thread of awareness that never quite faded. She could feel him even when he wasn't near, a steady pulse at the edge of her consciousness. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, she'd wonder what he felt through the bond, if he could sense her fear, her exhaustion, her growing determination. If he knew how often she caught herself watching him. He was unlike anyone she'd ever known. Where the nobles of her father's world wore masks of civility over their cruelty, Kael's harshness was honest, unvarnished. He didn't hide what he was or soften his edges for her comfort, but there were moments, brief, flickering moments, when the mask would slip, like the night she woke screaming from a nightmare, her father's voice echoing in her head, promising retribution. She'd bolted upright, gasping, her heart racing so fast she thought it might burst. And Kael was there, not touching her, not offering empty comfort, just sitting a few feet away, his presence solid and real in the darkness. "Breathe," he said quietly. She tried, failed, tried again. "You're safe." "Am I?" The words came out broken. "They'll find us eventually. My father won't let this go. The king won't find us." "How can you be so sure?" He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, rougher. "Because I know how to disappear." She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to understand the shadows that lived in his words. But he stood, moving back to his corner of the cabin, and the moment dissolved like smoke. She lay back down, her heart still racing, but the panic had eased. Because despite everything, despite the harshness, the distance, the walls he kept between them, she believed him. He knew how to keep her safe, even if she didn't know why. On the morning everything changed, the sky was the color of old bruises. Kael had been restless since dawn, pacing the perimeter of their camp with a tension that set her nerves on edge. Something was wrong. She could feel it through the bond, a tightness, a warning. "What is it?" she asked as he checked his weapons for the third time. "Storm coming." She glanced at the sky. The clouds were dark, yes, but not threatening. "It doesn't look that bad. Not that kind of storm." His jaw tightened. "We need to move. Now." "Move where?" "Away from here." "Kael, you're not making sense, They're coming." The words hit her like ice water. "Who?" He didn't answer, just grabbed his pack and started throwing their supplies into it with quick, efficient movements. "Kael, who's coming?" He stopped, turning to face her. And for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like fear. "Hunters. The king's men. They've been tracking us since we left your father's estate." Her blood went cold. "You knew? This whole time you knew they were following us?" "I suspected. And you didn't tell me? What would it have changed?" His voice was hard. "You'd have panicked, made mistakes. We needed time to get ahead of them." "Time?" Anger flared hot in her chest. "We've been sitting in this cabin for weeks. Because we needed you stronger, ready." He stepped closer, his gaze intense. "You think you could have outrun them 3 weeks ago? You could barely walk 5 miles without collapsing." She wanted to argue, but he was right, and they both knew it. "How close are they?" "Close enough that we leave now, or we don't leave at all." She grabbed her own pack, her hands shaking. "Where do we go?" "North, into the mountains." "That's suicide. It's almost winter." "So is staying here." She stared at him, her mind racing. The mountains were brutal even in summer. In the coming cold, they'd be deadly. No shelter, no food, just stone and ice and emptiness. But the alternative was being dragged back, being handed over to the Alpha King, being caged again. "Fine," she said. "North." He nodded once, then moved to the door. "Stay close. Don't speak unless I tell you to, and if I say run..." I run. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them. An understanding, a promise. Then they were moving. The forest was different when you were being hunted. Every snapping twig sounded like a gunshot. Every bird call could be a signal. The trees that had once felt like shelter now felt like a maze designed to trap them. Kyle moved through it like a ghost, his steps silent, his senses razor-sharp. Elara did her best to match him, using everything he'd taught her over the past weeks. Stay low, watch your footing, control your breathing. They'd been moving for 2 hours when Kyle suddenly stopped. She froze, her heart hammering. He tilted his head, listening. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. They're here. Where? East. Maybe half a mile. He scanned the trees, his expression calculating. We can't outrun them. Not in open forest. Then what do we do? He was silent for a moment. Then he turned to her and she saw the decision forming in his eyes before he spoke. We split up. What? No. Listen to me. He gripped her shoulders, his voice urgent. There's a ravine 2 miles north of here. Follow the stream until you reach it, then go west along the ridge. There's a cave hidden in the rocks. Wait for me there. I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice. If we stay together, they'll take us both. His grip tightened. I can lose them, but only if they're following me instead of you. Kyle, Elara. The way he said her name stopped her cold, not harsh, not distant, just real. I need you to trust me. She stared at him, her throat tight. What if they catch you? They won't. But if they do, then you keep going. You survive. That's the deal. Tears burned behind her eyes. That's not a deal. That's you sacrificing yourself. Something flickered across his face, too fast to name. Maybe I owe the world a sacrifice. Before she could respond, voices echoed through the trees, closer than before. Kael's expression hardened. Go. Now. Kael. Now. She wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, wanted to do anything but leave him, but she'd learned enough about survival to know when to obey. She ran. Quote, the stream was ice-cold and treacherous, the rocks slick with moss, and the current stronger than it looked. Elara stumbled through it, her boots filling with water, her legs numb from the cold. Behind her she could hear shouts, the crash of bodies moving through underbrush, the sounds of pursuit, but whether they were chasing her or Kyle, she couldn't tell. She pushed herself harder, her lungs burning, her muscles screaming. The stream twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the forest, farther from the cabin, farther from Kyle. The bond between them stretched, pulling tight like a rope about to snap, but it held. He was still alive, still moving. That had to be enough. So, she found the ravine just as the sun began to set. It was a slash in the earth, deep and jagged, with sheer rock walls that dropped away into shadow. Following Kyle's instructions, she moved west along the ridge, her eyes scanning the rocks for any sign of the cave he'd mentioned. She almost missed it. The entrance was hidden behind a fall of loose stone, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. She had to crawl on her hands and knees to get inside, the rough rock scraping her palms and catching on her cloak. But once inside, the cave opened up into a small, dry chamber. It was dark, cold, empty, safe. She collapsed against the far wall, her body shaking from exhaustion and fear and the adrenaline that was still coursing through her veins. And then she waited. Hours passed. The darkness outside the cave deepened from gray to black. The temperature dropped until she could see her breath misting in the air. Through the bond, she could feel Kyle, distant but present, moving, fighting, alive, but barely. Something was wrong. She could feel his pain like an echo, sharp and insistent, could feel the way the bond strained and pulled as if he was being dragged in a direction he didn't want to go. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay warm, trying not to imagine what was happening to him, trying not to think about what she'd do if he didn't come back. The sound of footsteps outside the cave made her freeze, slow, deliberate, too heavy to be an animal. Her hand moved to the knife at her belt, the one Kyle had given her weeks ago, insisting she carry it always. Her fingers closed around the hilt, and she pressed herself back against the rock, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped at the cave entrance. A shadow filled the opening, blocking out what little moonlight had filtered through. Elara! Relief hit her so hard she nearly sobbed. Kael! He crawled into the cave, his movements stiff and pained. When he emerged into the dim light, she saw why. Blood, dark and wet, soaking through his shirt, dripping from a gash on his temple. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." I said I'm fine. His voice was rough, exhausted. He slumped against the wall beside her, his breathing labored. She wanted to argue, to demand he let her help, but the set of his jaw told her it would be useless. Instead, she asked the question that mattered most. "Did you lose them?" "For now." He closed his eyes, his head falling back against the stone. "But they're not going to stop. Not until they find us." "Then what do we do?" He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, almost resigned. "We go to the last place they'd think to look." "Where?" He opened his eyes, turning to look at her, and in the darkness, she could just make out the grim determination in his expression. "The capital." She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You want us to go to the Alpha King's stronghold? That's insane." "It's the only move they won't expect. Because it's suicide. Or it's brilliant." He shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his injuries. "They'll be searching the wilderness, the border territories. The last place they'll look is right under their noses. And what happens when we get there, when someone recognizes me? They won't. You're not the pampered noble girl anymore, Elara. Look at yourself." She glanced down at her torn, mud-stained clothes, her calloused hands, her body lean and hard from weeks of survival training. He was right. She'd changed, in ways that went deeper than appearance. "Even if we make it to the capital," she said slowly, "what's the plan? We can't hide there forever." "We don't need forever, just long enough to figure out our next move." He met her eyes. "Unless you have a better idea." She didn't. That was the problem. Every option felt like a trap waiting to spring shut. But sitting here, waiting for the hunters to find them, wasn't an option either. "Fine," she said finally. "We go to the capital, but if this gets us killed, it won't." "You can't know that." He turned to look at her fully, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch, something fierce and protective and utterly certain. "I've kept you alive this long, haven't I?" She wanted to point out that she'd kept herself alive too, that she'd learned to hunt, to fight, to endure, that she wasn't the helpless girl who'd stumbled into his camp that first night. But the words stuck in her throat, because he was right. He had kept her alive, had pushed her, challenged her, forced her to become stronger. And somewhere along the way, she'd started to trust him, not just with her survival, with everything. "Yes," she said quietly. "You have." They rested in the cave until dawn, taking turns keeping watch. Kael's injuries were worse than he'd admitted. The gash on his temple needed stitching, and the wound in his side was deep enough to make her stomach turn when she finally convinced him to let her look at it. She cleaned it as best she could with water from her canteen and strips torn from her undershirt, her hands shaking as she worked. He sat stone still, his jaw clenched, not making a sound even when she knew it had to hurt. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" she asked as she tied off the makeshift bandage. "Same place I learned everything else. The hard way." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." But his tone was softer than usual, almost gentle. She sat back, studying him in the gray light filtering through the cave entrance. His face was drawn with pain and exhaustion, the scar on his jaw stark against his pale skin. He looked older than she'd thought at first. Harder, like a man who'd lived several lifetimes' worth of trouble. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. He frowned. "Doing what?" "Protecting me. You could have walked away a dozen times, could have cut the bond somehow, found a way to break free. But you didn't. The bond can't be broken. You know that. But you could have left me behind when the hunters came, could have let them take me and saved yourself." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "No, I couldn't have." "Why not?" "Because—" He stopped, something flickering across his face. Then he shook his head. "Get some rest. We move in an hour." It wasn't an answer, but it was something. and for now, that had to be enough. Whoa. The journey to the capital took 3 days. They moved carefully, staying off the main roads, avoiding settlements and travelers. The closer they got to the city, the more dangerous it became. Royal patrols were everywhere, their armor gleaming in the weak sunlight, their eyes sharp and searching. Twice, they had to hide while soldiers passed within feet of their position. Once, they spent an entire night pressed into a drainage ditch, while a hunting party camped just above them, their voices drifting down through the darkness. Every moment felt like walking a knife's edge. But Kael's instincts were flawless. He seemed to sense danger before it arrived, guiding them through the wilderness like he'd walked these paths 1,000 times. On the third night, they crested a hill, and there it was, the capital. It sprawled across the valley below, a maze of stone and shadow dominated by the massive fortress at its center, the Alpha King's stronghold. Even from a distance, it radiated power, dark towers rising like teeth against the night sky, walls thick enough to withstand a siege, battlements crawling with guards. It looked impenetrable. It looked like a prison. "That's where he lives," Elara said quietly. "The Alpha King." Kael's expression was unreadable. "Yes. Have you seen him? The king?" A pause. Too long. "Once." "What was he like?" "Exactly what you'd expect. Powerful, ruthless, dangerous." She shivered, pulling her cloak tighter. "And we're walking right into his city. We don't have a choice. There's always a choice." He turned to look at her then, and something in his eyes made her heart stutter. "No, Elara, there isn't. Not anymore." Before she could ask what he meant, he started down the hill toward the city below. She followed, the bond between them pulling tight, a thread of connection that felt heavier with every step. They entered the capital at dawn, slipping in with a group of farmers bringing goods to the market. Elara kept her head down, her hood pulled low, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every face they passed felt like a threat. Every uniform made her want to run. But Kael moved through the streets like he belonged there, calm and confident, navigating the maze of alleys and side streets with the ease of someone who knew the city intimately. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "Somewhere safe." "Nowhere in this city is safe." He shot her a look. "Trust me." She did. That was the problem. They wound through the lower district, where the buildings leaned together like drunks and the air smelled of smoke and unwashed bodies. Here, no one looked twice at them. No one cared about 2 more ragged travelers among hundreds. Kael stopped in front of a narrow building wedged between a tavern and a blacksmith shop. The door was unmarked, the windows dark. He knocked once, twice, 3 times in a specific pattern. The door opened a crack, revealing a sliver of a face, weathered, suspicious, female. "We're closed," the woman said. "Even for old friends?" Kael's voice was different, lighter, almost playful. The woman's eyes widened. "Spirits take me, is that?" She yanked the door open fully, revealing a small woman with gray-streaked hair and scars running down one side of her face. "It is. You absolute fool. Get in here before someone sees you." She grabbed Kael's arm and hauled him inside, Elara stumbling in after him. The door slammed shut, and the woman rounded on Kael, fury and something else. Relief? Warring in her expression. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The entire kingdom is looking for you. There's a bounty on your head that could buy a small army. And you just walk into the capital like you're out for a morning stroll?" "Good to see you too, Mara." The woman, Mara, threw her hands up. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Then her gaze shifted to Elara, and her expression changed, hardened. "And you brought her?" Elara stiffened. "You know who I am." "Everyone knows who you are. You're the runaway bride who caused the scandal of the century." Mara's eyes narrowed. "The girl who was supposed to marry the king." "I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice. You made yours. Now the whole kingdom is paying for it." "Mara," Kael said quietly. "Enough." The woman's jaw tightened, but she fell silent. After a moment, she sighed. "You're lucky I owe you more than 1 life debt, boy. Otherwise, I'd throw you both back out into the street." She gestured toward a narrow staircase. "Upstairs, 3rd door on the left. Stay there and don't make a sound. I'll bring food when I can." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," You've brought a storm down on all of us." She looked at Elara one more time, her expression unreadable. "I hope she's worth it." Then she disappeared into the back of the building, leaving them alone in the dim hallway. Kyle started up the stairs. Elara followed, her mind spinning with questions. Who was this woman? How did Kyle know her? And what had she meant by life debt? But when they reached the small room upstairs, barely more than a closet with a single window and a narrow bed, Kyle collapsed onto the floor, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. The questions would have to wait. She knelt beside him, checking his bandages. The wound in his side had reopened, fresh blood soaking through the fabric. "You need a healer," she said. "Can't. Too risky." "Kale, you're going to bleed out. I've had worse. That doesn't make it better." He caught her hand, his grip weak but steady. "I'll be fine. Just give me a few hours." She wanted to argue, but the exhaustion in his eyes stopped her. "Fine. But if you die, I'm going to be very angry with you." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Noted." She settled in beside him, her back against the wall, her hand still clasped in his. Outside the window, the capital stirred to life. Voices drifted up from the streets below. Somewhere in the distance, bells rang. And in the fortress at the city's heart, the Alpha King waited, unknowing, for now. Hours later, Elara woke to darkness and the sound of her own pulse thundering in her ears. Something was wrong. She could feel it through the bond, a spike of alarm, sharp and sudden. Kyle was on his feet before she could speak, his hand on his weapon, his body tense. "They found us," he said quietly. "How? Doesn't matter. We have to move. Now." Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Voices shouted. Steel rang against steel. The door burst open. And standing in the doorway, backlit by torches and surrounded by armed guards, was a man Elara had never seen but instantly recognized. Corvin, the king's envoy. His cold eyes swept over them, and he smiled. "Well, this makes things easier." Kale stepped in front of Elara, his blade drawn. "You're not taking her." "I'm not here for her." Corvin's smile widened. "I'm here for you, Your Majesty." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Elara's mind went blank, then exploded. "Your Majesty?" She turned to Kyle, to the man she'd bonded with, the stranger who'd saved her, the drifter who'd taught her to survive, and saw the truth written in his eyes. The Alpha King. It had always been him. The world tilted. Elara stumbled backward, her shoulder hitting the wall, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The bond between them, that constant, humming presence, suddenly felt like a noose tightening around her throat. "Your Majesty." The words echoed in her skull, each repetition driving the truth deeper like a nail through bone. Kyle, the drifter, the stranger who'd saved her, was the Alpha King, the man she'd fled from, the monster she'd been promised to. "No." The word came out strangled. "No, that's impossible." But even as she said it, pieces began clicking into place with horrible clarity. The way he'd known exactly where to hide. The way he moved through the wilderness like he owned it. The deference in Mara's eyes despite her harsh words. The life debt she'd mentioned. The way Corvin had looked at him that first night in the clearing, not with surprise, but with recognition. KL, no, the king, hadn't moved. He stood frozen, his blade still raised, his back to her. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand trembled, just slightly, around the hilt. "Kael," her voice cracked. "Tell me he's lying." He didn't turn, didn't speak. Corvin laughed, the sound cold and sharp. "Oh, this is delicious. You didn't tell her? Your Majesty, I'm shocked. I thought honesty was one of your famous virtues." "Shut your mouth, Corvin." "Why?" "She deserves to know, doesn't she? That the man she's been playing house with in the woods, the drifter she bonded herself to in a desperate bid for freedom," he paused, savoring the moment, "is the very king she was running from." Elara's knees gave out. She slid down the wall, her hands pressed flat against the rough wood, trying to anchor herself to something real. "It's not true," she whispered. "It can't be true." Kael finally turned, and the look on his face, raw, anguished, guilty, told her everything. "Elara, don't." She held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't say my name, don't." Her voice broke. How could you? Can explain. Explain what? That you've been lying to me for weeks? That every moment, every conversation, every... She choked on the words. Everything was a lie? It wasn't a lie. You're the Alpha King. The scream tore out of her, raw and jagged. The man I was sold to, the monster I ran from, and you let me believe... Tears burned her eyes. You watched me beg a stranger to save me from you. You bonded with me. You made me trust you. I never meant... What? To deceive me? To manipulate me? To turn my own desperation into some kind of sick game? It wasn't a game. His voice was rough, barely controlled. None of it was a game. Then what was it? She pushed herself to her feet, rage giving her strength. What possible reason could you have for this? Corvin cleared his throat. If I may. You may not, Kael snarled, his eyes never leaving Elara's face. This is between us. Actually, Your Majesty, it's between you and the entire kingdom, which is currently on the brink of civil war because you decided to play runaway in the woods instead of... Kael moved so fast, Elara barely saw it. One moment he was standing 5 feet away, the next his hand was wrapped around Corvin's throat, slamming him back against the doorframe. I said, shut your mouth. The guard surged forward, weapons raised, but Corvin lifted a hand, stopping them. His face was turning red, but he was smiling. Still the same temperamental beast, he choked out. Good to see some things never change. Kael released him with a shove and stepped back, his chest heaving. Corvin rubbed his throat, still smiling. You've had your fun, Majesty. Time to come home. I'm not going anywhere. Oh, I think you are. Because if you don't, if you continue this little charade, I'll have no choice but to inform the council that their king has lost his mind, that he's unfit to rule, that the crown should pass to someone more... stable. Kael's jaw tightened. You wouldn't dare. Try me. You've given me all the ammunition I need, abandoning your throne, breaking a contracted union, bonding with the very woman meant to secure the alliance with House Vance. Corvin's eyes gleamed. The nobles are already calling for your head. One word from me and they'll have it. Let them try. They won't have to. The law is clear. An alpha who abandons his responsibilities can be challenged, dethroned, executed. He tilted his head. Is she really worth dying for? The question hung in the air like poison. Kael didn't answer, but his eyes, when they flicked to Elara, were full of something that looked dangerously close to yes. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't reconcile the man she'd begun to trust with the monster she'd been taught to fear. Why? The question came out broken. Why did you do this? For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly, she almost didn't hear it. Because I needed to know if you were real. The guards took him. Not roughly, they wouldn't dare, king or not, but firmly. They disarmed him, bound his hands, and led him from the room like a prisoner. He didn't fight, didn't resist, just looked at Elara one last time, his dark eyes full of words he couldn't say, and let them take him. Corvin watched him go, then turned to Elara with something almost like pity in his cold eyes. You're free to go, Lady Vance. The contract is void. The bond you share with His Majesty, unfortunate as it is, makes you untouchable. He straightened his collar. Though if you're smart, you'll disappear. Go back to your father's estate. Marry some minor lord. Forget any of this ever happened. What's going to happen to him? Corvin raised an eyebrow. You care? Answer the question. He studied her for a long moment. The council will decide. Most likely, he'll be forced to abdicate, possibly exiled. If he's lucky, they'll let him live. A pause. Though luck has never been His Majesty's strong suit. And if he's not lucky? Then there will be a public execution, a lesson to the next king about the price of weakness. The words hit her like a physical blow. You can't. I can't do anything. I'm merely the messenger. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you should run. The king's enemies will come for you eventually. The bond makes you a liability, a weakness they can exploit. I'm not afraid of his enemies. Corvin smiled. You should be. Then he was gone, taking the guards with him, leaving Elara alone in the small room with the weight of the truth crushing down on her like a physical thing. She didn't leave. Couldn't leave. She sat on the floor where Kael had collapsed hours ago, her back against the wall, her mind spinning in circles that led nowhere. He was the Alpha King, the man she'd been sold to, the monster of her nightmares. But he was also the man who'd taught her to survive, who'd pushed her to be stronger, who'd kept her alive when he could have so easily let her die, who'd looked at her in the darkness and promised she was safe, because I needed to know if you were real. What did that even mean? The door opened. She tensed, expecting guards, expecting Corvin back to drag her away. But it was Mara. The older woman stepped inside, carrying a tray with bread, cheese, and water. She set it down beside Elara without a word. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. Starving yourself won't change anything. Elara looked up at her. You knew. This whole time you knew who he was. Of course I knew. Mara sat down across from her with a heavy sigh. Everyone in this district knows. We just don't talk about it. Why not? Because kings don't usually wander into the lower city and save street children from burning buildings. They don't usually pay for healers out of their own pocket when someone gets sick. They don't usually... She stopped, shaking her head. He's different than the nobles think. Different than the rumors say. He lied to me. Yes, he did. Mara's gaze was steady. But ask yourself why. I don't care why. Yes, you do. Otherwise, you'd have left by now. Elara wanted to argue, but the old woman was right. She should have run the moment the guards left, should have disappeared into the city, found a way out of the capital, put as much distance between herself and this nightmare as possible. But she hadn't. Because despite everything, despite the lies, the deception, the betrayal, she needed to understand. Tell me about him, she said quietly. The real him. Mara was silent for a long moment. Then she began to speak. The story Mara told was nothing like the rumors. The Alpha King, whose name was Kael Aldrich Thorne, had inherited the throne at 17 after his father's death. Too young, too unprepared, too idealistic for a court full of vipers. The nobles hated him from the start, Mara said. He wasn't like his father, wasn't cruel enough, wasn't willing to crush people for profit. He wanted to change things, to make the kingdom better, fairer. So they destroyed him for it. Tried to. They spread rumors, called him mad, said he was unfit. They blocked every reform, every attempt at progress. When that didn't work, they tried to poison him. Twice. Elara's breath caught. What? The second attempt nearly succeeded. He was sick for months. Half dead. And the whole time, the council circled like vultures, waiting for him to die so they could put someone more agreeable on the throne. But he survived. He survived, and he learned. Mara's expression hardened. He learned to wear a mask, to be the monster they expected, to rule with fear instead of hope, because fear was the only language they understood. So all the stories about his cruelty are mostly true. He's ruthless when he needs to be, brutal, unforgiving, but only to those who deserve it, the corrupt nobles, the ones who exploit the people. She leaned forward. The ones who traffic in human lives like your father. Elara flinched. That's why he agreed to the marriage contract, Mara continued. Not because he wanted a bride, but because it was the only way to get close enough to dismantle your father's network. The trafficking, the slavery hidden under the guise of arranged marriages. My father doesn't... She stopped, because that was a lie, and they both knew it. She thought of her sisters, of the other noble daughters married off like cattle, of the whispered stories she'd heard growing up about girls who disappeared, only to resurface years later in foreign courts, their eyes empty. He was going to use the marriage to destroy them, she said slowly. Yes. And then you ran. Mara's smile was sad. And he saw his chance. His chance for what? To know if there was one person in that whole rotten system who still had the courage to say no. The truth settled over Elara like snow. Quiet. Inexorable. Changing everything. She'd called him a monster, but the real monsters were the ones in silk and jewels. The ones who'd raised her, who'd sold her, who'd taught her that obedience was virtue and resistance was sin. Kyle had given her a choice. Not the first night, that had been survival, desperate and raw. But every day after, every harsh lesson, every challenge, every moment he'd pushed her to be stronger, fiercer, more herself. He'd been setting her free, even as it cost him everything. "Where are they holding him?" she asked. Mara's eyes widened. "Don't." "Where? You can't help him. The council—" "Where is he?" The older woman sighed. "The fortress, East Tower, but it's suicide to try." Elara was already on her feet. Getting into the fortress was easier than it should have been. The guards were focused on keeping people out of the dungeons, not watching for a ragged woman climbing through a servant's entrance. Elara moved through the lower corridors like a ghost, using every trick Kael had taught her. Stay in the shadows. Move with purpose. Look like you belong. The East Tower loomed above her, dark and foreboding. She found the stairs and started climbing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Any moment, someone would stop her, question her, throw her out, or worse. But no one did. She reached the upper level, breathless and shaking. Guards stood at attention outside a heavy wooden door. 2 of them, armed, alert. She had no weapons, no plan, no idea how to get past them, but she had to try. She stepped forward and froze as a hand clamped over her mouth, yanking her backward into an alcove. "What are you doing here?" She wrenched free, spinning to face Corvin. He looked furious, and something else. Concerned? "You need to leave," he hissed, "now, before someone sees you." "I need to see him." "Absolutely not. You can't stop me." "Watch me." He grabbed her arm. "Do you have any idea what the council will do if they find you here? They'll use you against him, turn you into leverage. You'll both end up dead." "Then help me." He stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Why would I do that?" "Because you're his envoy. Which means somewhere under all that ice, you actually give a damn whether he lives or dies." Corvin's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then he exhaled, long and slow. 5 minutes. That's all I can give you." The guards stepped aside at Corvin's command, though their expressions made it clear they didn't like it. The door swung open, and there, in a room that was more cell than chamber, sat Kael. He looked up as she entered, and the shock on his face was almost comical. "Elara? What? You shouldn't be here." "Probably not." She crossed the room, standing a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself. "But here I am anyway." He stood slowly, his hands still bound. "If they find you, I don't care." "Elara, why didn't you tell me?" The question came out quieter than she'd intended. "Why let me believe you were someone else?" He looked away. "Because I needed you to see me. Not the crown, not the rumors. Just me. I don't understand. Everyone who looks at me sees the same thing. The mad king, the monster, the tyrant." His voice was rough. "But when you looked at me that first night, terrified, desperate, but still brave, you saw a stranger, someone who could help, not someone to fear. So you lied." "Yes, I lied." He met her eyes. "And I'd do it again. Because those weeks with you, teaching you, watching you become stronger, were the first time in years I felt like something other than a weapon. Like a person." Her throat tightened. "You should have told me." "I know. You should have trusted me." "I know. I thought—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought I was finally free. That I'd escaped the cage. But I just traded one for another, didn't I?" "No." He stepped closer, the chains on his wrists clinking. "You're free, Elara. The bond. It doesn't make you mine. It makes you untouchable. No one can force you into anything ever again. That was the point." She stared at him, her mind reeling. "You bonded with me to protect me?" "I bonded with you because you asked me to, but yes, also that." "But it trapped you. If the council finds out, let them. I don't care. You should care. They're going to kill you." "Maybe, maybe not." His lips quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "I've survived worse. This isn't a joke. I know it's not." His expression sobered. But I meant what I said. You were worth it. All of it. The words hit her like a punch to the chest. I was supposed to hate you, she whispered. You still can. I should hate you. I know. But I don't. The confession tore out of her. I don't know what I feel, but it's not hate. Something flickered in his eyes. Hope? Pain? She couldn't tell. Elara. The door burst open. Guards flooded in, weapons drawn. Behind them, a cluster of nobles in fine robes, their faces twisted with rage and righteousness. At their head was a man Elara recognized from portraits, Lord Chancellor Brennan, her father's closest ally. Seize them both, he commanded. The throne room was a cathedral of power, soaring ceilings, marble floors, and walls lined with the banners of every noble house in the kingdom. At the far end, the throne itself sat empty, a monument of carved stone and old magic. Elara and Kael were dragged before the council, forced to their knees on the cold floor. Around them, the nobles gathered like crows around carrion, their faces masks of barely concealed glee. Brennan stood at the center, radiating authority. Kael Aldrich Thorne, you stand accused of abandoning your throne, breaking sacred contracts, and conduct unbecoming of a king. How do you plead? Kael lifted his head, his expression calm. I plead that this council has no authority over me. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Brennan's face darkened. You dare! I dare question a council that spent the last 5 years trying to undermine me at every turn. That's blocked every reform. That's profited from the suffering of my people. Kael's voice rang out, clear and strong. If anyone's abandoned their responsibilities, it's you. This is treason. This is truth. Kael stood despite the guards trying to force him down. You don't want a king. You want a puppet, someone you can control. And when I refused to play that role, you tried to destroy me. Lies. Are they? Then explain the poison. Explain the assassins. Explain why half the reforms I've proposed have mysteriously died in committee, only to be resurrected under your names months later. Silence fell. Heavy and damning. Brennan's face went purple. You've lost your mind. No, I've lost my patience. Kael's eyes swept the room. I've played your games, worn your masks, let you believe I was the monster you needed me to be. But I'm done. Then you're done being king, Brennan snapped. By law, a monarch who abandons his throne forfeits the crown. Guards, remove him. Wait! Elara's voice cut through the chaos. Every eye turned to her. She stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. Before you condemn him, you should know something. Brennan waved a dismissive hand. The girl has no standing here. The girl is Lady Elara Vance, daughter of Lord Matthias Vance, and the woman your king bonded with to save her from a forced marriage. She looked at the assembled nobles, which means I have every right to speak. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Speak then, Brennan said coldly, though I fail to see what you could possibly say that would change. I know about the trafficking. The room went silent. What trafficking? Brennan's voice was carefully controlled. The network. The one my father runs with your support. The one that takes noble daughters and common girls and sells them to foreign courts, to brothels, to anyone willing to pay. She met his eyes. The one this council has protected for years. You're delusional. Am I? Then explain the ledgers, the shipment records, the payments coded as dowries but sent to slave traders in the southern ports. You have no proof. I have everything. Kael's voice was quiet but deadly. I've spent 5 years building a case against you, against all of you, every transaction, every bribe, every girl who disappeared. He nodded to Corvin, who stepped forward with a leather satchel. It's all here, Corvin said, dumping the contents onto the floor. Papers scattered across the marble. Names, dates, amounts, enough to hang half this council. Chaos erupted. Nobles shouted denials. Guards shifted uncertainly. Brennan's face went from purple to gray. This is, you can't. I can, Kael said, and I will, unless you abdicate, all of you, immediately. You can't force us out. No, but the people can. Kael's smile was sharp. These documents are being distributed to every guild, every merchant house, every farmer's collective in the kingdom as we speak. By sunrise, everyone will know what you've done." Brennan lunged forward, rage twisting his features. "You've destroyed everything." "No, I've destroyed you." Kale's voice was iron. "The kingdom will survive. It always does. But you? You're finished." For a moment, Brennan looked ready to attack. Then his shoulders slumped. "You've won," he said bitterly. "Are you satisfied?" "Not yet." Kale turned to Elara. "There's one more thing I need to do." He walked to her, his chains clanking with each step. When he reached her, he dropped to one knee. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Asking." He looked up at her, and his eyes, those dark, dangerous eyes, were full of something raw and real. "Not as a king, not as the man who deceived you, just as Kael, as the person I became when I was with you." Her heart stopped. "Elara Vance, will you stand with me? Not because you have to, not because of duty or bonds or crowns, but because you choose to." The throne room had gone utterly silent. Every eye was on them, waiting. She looked down at the man kneeling before her, the Alpha King, the monster, the stranger who'd saved her, the man who'd taught her to be free, and she made her choice. "Yes." Ja. The council collapsed within days. Some nobles fled. Others were arrested. A few, facing overwhelming evidence, took their own lives rather than face trial. Lord Matthias Vance was among the first to fall. The documents Kael had compiled were damning, decades of trafficking hidden under the guise of strategic marriages. When the truth came out, his allies abandoned him. His wealth was seized, his titles stripped. He died alone in a prison cell, waiting for a trial that never came. Elara felt nothing when she heard. Not grief, not satisfaction, just a strange, hollow emptiness where her family used to be. But she wasn't alone. Kael stood beside her on the fortress battlements, watching the sun set over the capital. The city sprawled below them, alive and vibrant, already beginning to heal. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Which part?" "All of it. Running, the bond, choosing to stay." She considered the question, thought about the girl she'd been, polished, obedient, invisible, and the woman she'd become, scarred, strong, free. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret any of it." He looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. "Even the lies?" "Even those. Because they led to the truth." "And what truth is that?" She turned to face him fully. "That I was never meant to be a cage, and neither were you." Something in his expression cracked, softened. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly. "Probably not." She smiled. "But you're stuck with me anyway. Bond, remember?" "I remember." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind whipping around them, carrying the scents of the city below. Then Kael spoke again, his voice rough with something that might have been fear. "What happens now?" Elara looked out at the kingdom spread before them. A kingdom in chaos, a kingdom that needed rebuilding, a kingdom that needed a king and queen who understood what it meant to survive. "Now," she said, "we rewrite the story." And in the dying light, with the city at their feet and the future uncertain before them, the Alpha King and the runaway bride stood together. Not as ruler and subject, not as captor and captive, but as equals. Two people who'd found each other in the darkness and refused to let go. The kingdom would call it a scandal. History would call it a revolution. But they would call it something else entirely. Choice. The coronation was set for 3 days hence. The council chambers were being cleaned, the throne room prepared. Messengers rode out to every corner of the kingdom, carrying news of the changes to come. But that night, in the quiet hours before dawn, Kael found Elara standing in the old throne room, staring at the empty seat of power. "Having second thoughts?" he asked. She didn't turn. "I was just thinking about the girl I used to be, the one who was so afraid of this." She gestured at the throne, "And now I'm about to sit beside it." "You don't have to. The bond makes you my queen by law, but you don't have to take the crown if you don't want it." "I know," She finally looked at him. But I want it. Why? Because there are other girls like me, other daughters being sold, other people trapped in cages they didn't choose. Her voice strengthened. And I want to break every single one of those cages. Pride flickered in his eyes. Then we'll do it together. Together, she echoed. He stepped closer, reaching out to take her hand. The bond between them hummed, warm and steady. I need you to understand something, he said quietly. What's coming won't be easy. The nobles who survived will fight us. The people will question us. There will be attempts on our lives, plots, betrayals, constant danger. I know. And you're still choosing this? She squeezed his hand. I'm choosing you. The throne just comes with the territory. He laughed, the sound rough and surprised. Then he pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For running, for being brave enough to say no, for teaching me what freedom looks like. Her breath caught. I didn't teach you anything. You taught me everything. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. You reminded me why I wanted to change this kingdom in the first place, why I became king, not for power, but for people like you, people who deserve better. Tears burned behind her eyes. The door burst open. Corvin stood in the entrance, his face grim. Your Majesty, we have a problem. Kael's expression hardened instantly. What kind of problem? The kind with an army, yeah. They gathered in the war room, Kael, Elara, Corvin, and the few remaining council members who'd proven their loyalty. A map of the kingdom spread across the table, marked with red pins. Lord Brennan didn't run, Corvin said, pointing to a cluster of pins in the eastern territories. He's been rallying support, calling you a usurper, claiming you've lost your mind and need to be removed for the good of the kingdom. How many? 3,000, maybe more. Houses Vance, Morstead, and Kellick have joined him. They're marching on the capital. Silence fell. 3,000 soldiers, led by men who had everything to lose if Kael's reforms went through. When will they arrive? Elara asked. 3 days, maybe 4 if we're lucky. The same day as the coronation. Kael studied the map, his expression unreadable. We have 2,000 garrison troops, not enough to hold against a siege. We could evacuate, one of the council members suggested. Retreat to the northern fortress, regroup. No. Kael's voice was flat. We don't run. Then we fight. We negotiate. Everyone stared at him. You can't be serious, Corvin said. Brennan wants your head. There's no negotiating with that. Then I'll give him what he wants. What? Kael looked up, his eyes hard and determined. I'll meet him on the field, alone, single combat. His champion against me. Winner takes the throne. That's suicide, but it's tradition. Alpha law. He can't refuse without looking like a coward. Kael's smile was sharp. And I've never lost a challenge. There's always a first time, Elara said quietly. He looked at her, and something in his expression softened. Not this time. You can't know that. I can, because I have something to fight for. He reached out, taking her hand. Something worth winning for. She wanted to argue, to demand he find another way, to tell him that crowns weren't worth dying for. But she understood. This wasn't about the crown. It was about proving that change was possible, that the old ways could be challenged, that a king could stand up to corruption and win. It was about hope. Then I'm coming with you, she said. Elara, I'm not asking permission. She met his eyes. You said we do this together. That means I stand with you, always. For a moment he looked like he might refuse. Then he nodded. Together. The battlefield was a stretch of open ground outside the capital walls. Brennan's army had arrived in the night, setting up camp just beyond bow range, their banners snapping in the cold wind. At dawn, both sides assembled. On one side, Brennan and his coalition, nobles in fine armor, surrounded by soldiers ready to fight and die for their master's profit. On the other, Kael and Elara, standing alone except for Corvin and a handful of loyal guards. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Brennan rode forward on a massive warhorse, his armor gleaming. Behind him came his champion, a hulking man with a sword the size of a small tree and scars covering every visible inch of skin. "Your Majesty," Brennan called, his voice dripping with false respect. "I'm pleased you've come to your senses." "Have I?" Kael's voice was calm. "Because from where I'm standing, you're the one who's about to make a very foolish decision. The only foolish decision was yours, thinking you could destroy centuries of tradition, thinking the people would accept a mad king and his runaway whore as their rulers." Elara flinched. Kael's hand tightened on his sword. "Careful, Brennan. That's my queen you're insulting. She's a pawn, a mistake. And when I take your throne, the first thing I'll do is dissolve that obscene bond and marry her off properly. Over my dead body." Brennan smiled. "That's the idea." He gestured to his champion. The massive man stepped forward, drawing his sword with a sound like thunder. "This is Garrick. Undefeated in 27 challenges, he'll make your death quick, merciful, even." Kael studied the champion, then looked back at Brennan. "And if I win, you won't. But if I do, you disband your army. You and your allies go into exile, and you never set foot in this kingdom again." Brennan laughed. "Agreed. Not that it matters." Kael turned to Elara. "Whatever happens, don't." She grabbed his arm. "Don't say goodbye, because you're coming back." "Elara, you're coming back," she repeated, her voice fierce. "You promised me we'd do this together, so you're going to win. And then we're going to rebuild this kingdom. Together." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he leaned in and kissed her, quick and hard and full of everything he couldn't say. When he pulled back, his eyes were burning. "Together," he said. Then he turned and walked onto the field. The field was silent except for the wind. Kael walked to the center of the cleared ground, his steps measured and unhurried. He'd removed his cloak, leaving only the worn leather armor he'd traveled in for weeks. No royal regalia, no crown, nothing to mark him as king except the way he carried himself. Garrick lumbered forward from the opposite side, his massive sword resting on his shoulder like it weighed nothing. Up close, he was even more intimidating, easily 7 feet tall, muscles like corded iron, eyes flat and dead. A killer. Nothing more, nothing less. The crowd on both sides pressed forward, nobles and soldiers alike craning for a better view. This was the old way, trial by combat, alpha law, the kind of brutal justice that had governed the kingdom for centuries. Brennan stood at the front of his forces, arms crossed, confidence radiating from every pore. Elara stood alone on Kael's side, her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood. The arbiter, a neutral priest from the city temple, stepped between the combatants. "This challenge is witnessed and sanctioned. Single combat to first blood, yield, or death. The victor claims the throne and the right to rule. Do both parties accept these terms?" "I do," Kael said. Garrick grunted something that might have been agreement. "Then begin." The priest stepped back. For a moment, nothing happened. The two men circled each other, Garrick's heavy blade gleaming in the morning light, Kael's sword, smaller, lighter, held in a relaxed guard. Then Garrick charged. The speed was shocking for a man his size. He closed the distance in 3 massive strides, his sword swinging in a brutal arc meant to cut Kael in half. Kael wasn't there. He'd moved before Garrick committed to the strike, sliding to the side with fluid grace. The massive blade crashed into the dirt where he'd been standing, throwing up a spray of earth. Garrick recovered faster than expected, spinning and bringing the sword around in a horizontal slash. Kael ducked under it, the blade passing close enough to ruffle his hair. "Come on!" Brennan shouted from the sidelines. "End this!" Garrick pressed forward, his attacks coming faster now. Overhead chops, wide sweeps, brutal thrusts that would have skewered a lesser fighter. Each one carried enough force to shatter bone, and each one missed. Kael moved like water, flowing around the strikes, never quite where Garrick expected him to be. He wasn't trying to block. His smaller blade would shatter against that monster sword. Instead, he was reading the rhythm, learning the pattern, waiting for his moment. It came on the 8th strike. Garrick overextended on a downward chop, putting too much power behind it. When the blade hit the ground, he was off balance for half a second. Kael struck. His blade flashed out, scoring a line across Garrick's exposed forearm. First blood. The crowd gasped. Garrick looked down at the cut, then back at Kael. Something changed in his dead eyes. Respect, maybe, or anger. He attacked again, faster now, more aggressive. The massive sword became a blur of steel, each strike meant to overwhelm, to crush, to end this. But Kyle had found his rhythm. He wove through the assault like he'd choreographed it, his movements efficient and precise. Every wasted motion from Garrick became an opening. Every overcommitted strike became an opportunity. Elara watched, her heart in her throat, as the fight transformed. What had started as a mismatch, the massive warrior versus the leaner king, was revealing itself as something else entirely. Kale wasn't just faster, he was better. This was what he'd hidden beneath the mask of the Mad King, what he'd kept locked away while playing the monster for the nobles. This was the warrior who'd survived 2 assassination attempts and countless challenges. This was Kyle Aldrich Thorne, unfiltered and unleashed. Another strike whistled past his head. He countered, his blade finding the gap in Garrick's armor at the shoulder. Another cut. Garrick roared, the sound more frustrated than pained. He changed tactics, trying to grapple, to use his superior size and strength to pin Kale down. It almost worked. Garrick's hand closed around Kael's sword arm, his grip like a vice. He yanked Kael forward, his other fist swinging toward Kael's face. Kael dropped his sword. The move shocked everyone. His blade clattered to the ground as he twisted in Garrick's grip, using the momentum to get inside the bigger man's guard. His elbow drove up into Garrick's jaw with a crack like splitting wood. Garrick's head snapped back, his grip loosened. Kael spun, grabbed his fallen sword, and in one fluid motion drove it through the gap in Garrick's armor, just below the ribs. Not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to end it. Garrick staggered, looked down at the blade protruding from his side, and slowly dropped to his knees. "Yield," Kael said quietly. For a moment, Garrick just stared at him. Then, with visible effort, he nodded. "I yield." The field erupted. Kael's supporters, what few there were, cheered. Brennan's forces stood in shocked silence. The Arbiter rushed forward, checking Garrick's wound, then raising his hand. "The challenge is complete. The victor is King Kale Aldrich Thorne." Brennan's face went purple. No, this was fixed. Garrick, get up. Finish him." But Garrick remained on his knees, blood seeping through his armor, his expression resigned. "It's over, my lord," the champion said quietly. "He won. Fair." "I don't accept this." Brennan turned to his army. "Men, take them both." No one moved. The soldiers stood frozen, looking at their commanders, at Brennan, at each other, uncertain. Kale walked toward Brennan's lines, his sword still in hand but pointed down. Blood dripped from the blade, dark against the pale grass. "It's done, Brennan," he called out, his voice carrying across the field. "By your own rules. Your champion fell. The throne stays mine." "You cheated. I fought by Alpha Law, the same law you've used to crush rivals for decades." Kale stopped 20 feet from Brennan's position. "Don't like it when the rules work against you?" Brennan drew his own sword with a hiss of steel. "Then I'll finish this myself." He charged forward, rage overcoming sense. Kale didn't even raise his blade. He just watched as Corvin stepped out of nowhere and clotheslined Brennan with an armored forearm, sending the older man crashing to the ground. "That's enough," Corvin said coldly. "You lost. Accept it with whatever dignity you have left." Brennan scrambled back, his face twisted with fury and fear. "This isn't over. The houses will never accept this. They'll rise against you." "Let them try." Kyle's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Because I'm done playing by your rules. I'm done pretending to be the monster you needed. From now on, this kingdom answers to its people, not to you." He turned to the assembled soldiers. "Any man here who wants to continue fighting, step forward now. But know this, you won't be fighting me. You'll be fighting everyone in the capital who suffered under the corruption you've protected. Every family torn apart by trafficking, every merchant crushed by unfair taxes, every common person ground into dust so the nobles could profit." Silence. Then, one by one, soldiers began laying down their weapons. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Within minutes, Brennan's entire army had disarmed themselves. The rebellion was over before it truly began. Brennan and his co-conspirators were arrested on the field. The houses that had supported them, Morstead, Kellick, and what was left of House Vance, were stripped of their seats on the council. Their lands were seized, their wealth distributed to the victims of their crimes. Justice, swift and merciless. But Kyle took no pleasure in it. That night, as physicians tended to Garrick's wound, the champion would live, though he'd never fight again. Elara found the king standing alone on the fortress walls, staring out at the city. "You should be celebrating," she said quietly. He didn't turn. "Should I? I just destroyed half the noble houses in the kingdom, created a power vacuum that will take years to fill.
Started a war that might have been avoided if you'd what? Stayed silent? Let them continue trafficking girls? Let corruption fester until the whole kingdom rotted from the inside?" She moved to stand beside him. "You did the right thing. The right thing doesn't always feel good." "No, but it's still right." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I killed Garrick. He's alive. I might as well have killed him. He'll never fight again. That's all he knew. All he was."
Cale's hands gripped the stone wall.
"I took that from him. He would have taken your life." "I know, but that doesn't make it easier." Elara studied his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the shadows under his eyes, the weight of kingship pressing down on shoulders that had already carried too much. This was the man beneath the crown, the one who felt every decision, who bled for every victory. "You're not a monster," she said quietly. He laughed, the sound bitter.
"Tell that to Brennan. To the nobles rotting in cells. To Garrick. They made their choices. You made yours. The difference is you were trying to save people, not profit from them." "Was I? Or was I just imposing my will on a kingdom that didn't ask for it?" She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "The people did ask for it. Maybe not in words, but every time they suffered under corrupt laws, every time a daughter disappeared, every time they went hungry while nobles feasted, they were asking for someone to stand up, someone to say enough. And if I'm wrong, if my way isn't better, then we'll fix it together." She held his gaze. "But you're not wrong. I've seen both sides now, the gilded cage and the wilderness, the courtly lies and the brutal truth, and I know which one I choose." "The wilderness?" "Freedom, in whatever form it takes." Something in his expression cracked. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "You keep saying that. I'm starting to think you actually believe it. Because it's true." "No, it's fear." She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "You're afraid that if you let yourself want this, want me, want happiness, it'll be taken away. That's what they taught you. That's how they controlled you." He stared at her, something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "What if you're right?" he asked quietly. "Then we fight, the same way we've been fighting." She smiled. "You told me survival was everything. Well, this is survival too. Building something worth protecting, something worth fighting for." He was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded. "Together. Together." The coronation was postponed, not cancelled, but delayed until the kingdom could properly prepare. There were too many pieces to put back together, too many wounds to heal. But work began immediately. Kyle assembled a new council, this time drawn not from the noble houses, but from the merchant guilds, the farmer collectives, the craftsmen's associations. People who understood the kingdom from the ground up, not the throne room down. It was unprecedented, radical, dangerous. It was also necessary. Elara worked alongside him, learning the intricate dance of governance. She sat in on council meetings, listened to petitions from commoners, studied the ledgers that had once been used to hide corruption. And slowly, she began to understand the true scope of what Kyle was trying to do. He wasn't just reforming the kingdom. He was rebuilding it from the foundation up. One morning, 3 weeks after the failed rebellion, a messenger arrived from the southern territories. A young woman, dusty from the road, carrying a sealed letter. Kale broke the seal and read in silence. His expression didn't change, but Elara felt the bond between them tighten with tension. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the letter. It was from a group calling themselves the Daughters of Freedom, girls who'd been rescued from the trafficking network, now organizing to help others. They'd heard about the new king's reforms, about the queen who'd run from a forced marriage and survived. They wanted to meet her. They're asking you to come south, Kael said, to speak to them, to help them build a network for other girls escaping bad situations. Elara read the letter again, her hands trembling slightly.
How many are there? Hundreds, maybe thousands. The network your father ran was just one of many. She looked up at him. I have to go. I know. Will you come with me? He hesitated. The kingdom can survive a few weeks without you. Corvin's capable. The new council is settling in. She stepped closer. But those girls, they need to see that escape is possible, that there's life after the cage. You want to be a symbol. I want to be hope. His expression softened. Then we'll go, both of us. The journey south took 2 weeks. They traveled with a small escort, moving through territory that had once been hostile but was slowly transforming. In every town, every village, they saw signs of change. Merchants who'd once paid crushing taxes now invested in their communities. Farmers who'd been forced to sell their land now owned it outright. Girls who'd lived in fear now walked the streets with their heads up. It wasn't perfect. There was still poverty, still injustice, still 1,000 problems that would take years to solve. But it was better, and better was a start. They reached the southern city of Kelmar on a gray morning. The Daughters of Freedom had taken over an old manor house on the outskirts, converting it into a shelter and training center. When Elara and Kael arrived, they were met by a woman named Sarah, mid-20s, scarred, with eyes that had seen too much but refused to break. Your Majesties, she said, the title awkward on her tongue. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation, Elara replied. And please, call me Elara. Sarah studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. Elara, come. The others are waiting. She led them into the manor, through corridors that had been scrubbed clean and painted with bright murals. Rooms that once held furniture now held beds for dozens of girls. A ballroom had been converted into a training hall where women practiced self-defense. And in the main gathering room, over 100 women and girls sat waiting. The silence when Elara entered was absolute. They stared at her, these survivors, these fighters, with a mix of hope and suspicion and desperate hunger for something to believe in. Elara's throat tightened. She'd prepared words, a speech about freedom and choice and rebuilding. But standing there, looking at faces that mirrored her own journey, the words felt hollow. So she told them the truth instead. My name is Elara Vance, she began. 3 months ago, I was you. I was trapped, sold to a man I'd never met, terrified of a future I hadn't chosen. She saw recognition flash across dozens of faces. I was told it was my duty, my purpose, that I should be grateful for the honor of being married to a king. Her voice strengthened. But I knew it was a lie. I knew that duty without choice was just another word for slavery. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. So I ran. I didn't have a plan, didn't have resources or training or any idea how to survive. I just knew I couldn't stay. She glanced at Kael standing quietly to the side, letting her speak. I got lucky. I found someone who helped me, who taught me that survival wasn't about being perfect or fearless. It was about being stubborn enough to keep going when everything said to give up. But many of you didn't get lucky, she continued. Many of you had to save yourselves, had to fight your way free with no help, no hope, nothing but your own will to live. The room was silent now, every eye fixed on her. You're the bravest people I've ever met, and I didn't come here to give you orders or tell you what to do. I came to ask what you need, how we, the kingdom, can help. Sarah stood from the front row. We need the laws changed. The ones that say fathers can sell daughters, that husbands own wives, that women are property. Done, Kael said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. He stepped forward, his presence commanding but not threatening. I've already drafted the reforms. They're waiting for council approval, which will come in the next session. Within a month, those laws will be abolished. Shocked silence. Then a girl from the back shouted, What about the girls still trapped? The ones in contracts signed before the laws change? All contracts of coercion are void, Kael replied. Any woman or girl held against her will has the legal right to leave. Any family or individual who tries to stop them will be prosecuted. And who enforces that? Another woman called. The local lords? The ones profiting from the system? No, you do.
The room erupted in confused murmurs. Kyle raised his hand for silence. I'm establishing a new branch of royal authority, the Daughters' Guard. Women trained in law, combat, and investigation. Their sole purpose is to enforce these protections, to ensure that the laws aren't just words on paper. He looked at Sarah. I'd like you to lead it. Sarah's mouth fell open. Me? I'm nobody. You're a survivor who built a network to save others. You're exactly who this needs. For a moment, Sarah just stared at him. Then she stood straighter. I'll do it, on one condition. Name it. Full authority. We answer to the crown, but we don't answer to the local lords. We investigate anyone, arrest anyone, regardless of rank. Kale smiled. Agreed. The room exploded. Women jumped to their feet, talking over each other, asking questions, volunteering for the guard. The energy shifted from cautious hope to electric possibility. Elara felt tears sting her eyes. This was what they'd fought for, not crowns or thrones or power, but the ability to give others what had been stolen from her. Choice. Tut. They stayed in Kelmar for a week, helping to organize the Daughters' Guard, training the first recruits, establishing protocols and guidelines. On their last night, Elara and Kyle walked through the manor gardens, overgrown but beautiful, wild roses climbing the old stone walls. You realize what you've done, right? She said quietly. Started a revolution? Given half the kingdom a reason to want you dead. He laughed. Only half? I must be slipping. She shoved his shoulder. I'm serious. The nobles who survived Brennan's fall, they're not going to accept this quietly. I know. There will be more rebellions, more assassination attempts, more... He stopped walking, turning to face her. Elara, I know, and I don't care. You should care. You could die. We all die eventually. He took her hands. The question is what we do with the time before that, and I'd rather spend it fighting for something that matters than living safe and comfortable while people suffer. That's very noble, also very stupid. Probably both. His expression sobered. But I need you to understand something. If you want to walk away, if this is too much, too dangerous, too... She kissed him. Hard and fierce and full of everything she couldn't put into words. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide. I'm not walking away, she said. I chose you. Not the crown, not the kingdom. You. The man who taught me how to be free, even when he was trapped himself. Elara, I love you, you impossible, infuriating, self-sacrificing idiot. And if you think I'm letting you face all this alone, you're even more delusional than the nobles think. He stared at her, something breaking and reforming in his expression all at once. Say that again. Which part? The first part. She smiled. I love you. I love you too. The words came out rough, like he'd never said them before, like he wasn't sure he had the right. I've loved you since the night you chose to run, since you begged a stranger to save you and refused to back down even when I warned you, since you proved that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to move forward anyway. That's very poetic for a mad king. I have hidden depths. Clearly. She leaned her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. What happens now? Now we go back to the capital. Hold the coronation. Formalize the reforms. He wrapped his arms around her. Build a kingdom worth defending. Together. Together. They stood there in the garden, surrounded by wild roses and the sound of women laughing inside the manor, women who'd found their way out of darkness and were building something new. And for the first time in months, Elara felt something she hadn't dared to feel before. Hope. Not the desperate, clawing hope of survival, but the steady, enduring hope of possibility. The hope that said, we can make this better. The journey back to the capital took longer than expected. Word of the Daughters' Guard had spread, and in every town they passed through, women came forward. Some wanted to join. Others wanted to report abuse. Still others just wanted to see the runaway bride and the mad king who'd chosen each other over tradition. They became symbols whether they wanted to or not. And symbols, Elara was learning, carried weight. 2 days from the capital, they stopped in a small village for supplies. The local lord, a minor noble named Ferris, met them with barely concealed hostility. Your Majesty, he said, the words clipped, To what do we owe the honor? Just passing through, Kael replied calmly. We'll be gone by morning. I would appreciate that. Your reforms have caused quite a disruption in my territory. Oh? How so? Ferris's jaw tightened. Half my servant girls have run off, claiming they have the right to leave their contracts. It's made managing my household impossible. Then perhaps you should consider paying them fairly instead of relying on indentured servitude. I have contracts, which are now void, as I announced throughout the kingdom. Kael's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. If you're having trouble retaining staff, Lord Ferris, perhaps the problem isn't the law. It's you. Ferris's face went red. You can't just... People need structure, order. Without it, there's chaos. Funny, I don't see chaos. I see people choosing their own paths. Those girls belong to me. No one belongs to anyone. Elara stepped forward, her voice quiet but carrying. Not anymore. Ferris turned his glare on her. You're the one who started this, the runaway who couldn't fulfill her duty. You've poisoned the whole kingdom with your selfishness. Kael moved, but Elara held up a hand, stopping him. You're right about one thing, she said to Ferris. I was selfish. I chose myself over duty, over tradition, over what I was told was right. She stepped closer. And I'd make the same choice again, because duty without choice is slavery. And I'd rather burn the whole system down than live one more day as someone's property. You're destroying our way of life. Good. Your way of life was built on suffering, on treating people like objects, on cages wrapped in silk. Her voice hardened. And if you can't survive without that, then you don't deserve to. Ferris looked like he might explode. His hand went to his sword. Every guard in Kael's escort drew their weapons. The Lord froze, looking at the circle of steel suddenly pointed at him. I'd think very carefully about your next move, Corvin said quietly from behind Ferris. Attacking the Queen is treason, and we've gotten very efficient at dealing with traitors. Ferris slowly lowered his hand, but the hatred in his eyes remained. This isn't over, he said quietly. No, Kael agreed. It's not, but you'll lose, because you're fighting for a past that's already dead, and we're fighting for a future that's inevitable. They left the village that night instead of waiting for morning. As they rode through the darkness, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that Ferris's words had been more than anger. They'd been a promise. The capital came into view on a cold, clear morning. The city sprawled below them, larger than Elara remembered, more vibrant. Smoke rose from thousands of chimneys, boats crowded the river, people filled the streets. And above it all, the fortress stood like a sentinel, dark stone against bright sky. Home. The thought surprised her, but it was true. Somewhere in the chaos of the past months, this city, this kingdom, had become hers. Not because she'd been born to it, but because she'd chosen it. They entered through the main gates this time, no more sneaking through side doors. The people lined the streets, watching as their king and queen rode past. Some cheered, some were silent, some looked openly hostile. But they all looked. At the fortress, the new council waited. Commoners mixed with minor nobles who'd proven their integrity, merchants, craftsmen, even a farmer from the northern territories. It was messy, chaotic, nothing like the ordered hierarchy of the old council. It was perfect. Your Majesties, the head counselor, a former merchant named Thane, bowed. Welcome back. The reforms are ready for your signature. Kael dismounted, helping Elara down. Show me. They spent the next 6 hours in the council chambers, reviewing the documents that would reshape the kingdom. Laws abolishing forced contracts, protections for workers, rights for women and children, limitations on noble power. Each one was a nail in the coffin of the old order. Each one was a step toward something better. When the sun began to set, Kael signed the final document with a flourish. It's done, Thane said quietly. The kingdom will never be the same. Good, Elara said. It was broken. This is how we fix it. That night, a celebration erupted in the lower city. Spontaneous and joyful, people poured into the streets with music and dancing and laughter that echoed off the stone walls. Elara and Kael watched from the battlements, the sound of celebration washing over them like a wave. "They're happy," Elara said softly. "Some of them. Others are planning how to kill us." Kael's tone was matter-of-fact. "Probably Ferris and his allies. Maybe others we haven't identified yet." "Lovely. And you call me optimistic." He smiled. "I'm realistic. There's a difference. So what do? We keep going. We keep pushing. We keep proving that this works." He looked at her. "And we stay alive long enough to see it through. That's your grand plan? Don't die?" "It's worked so far." She laughed, the sound surprising her. After everything, the fear, the betrayal, the battles, she could still laugh. Maybe that was the real victory. "The coronation is in 3 days, Kael said quietly. "Last chance to back out." "Are you asking me to?" "No, but I need you to understand what you're choosing. Once you take that crown, there's no going back. You'll be a target forever. You'll never be safe. Never be free the way you were in those weeks in the forest." "I was never free in the forest," she corrected. "I was surviving. There's a difference." She turned to face him fully. "But this? Building something that matters? Fighting for people who can't fight for themselves? This is what freedom actually looks like. Even if it kills us?" "Even then." He pulled her close, and they stood together watching their city, broken and healing, dangerous and full of possibility, spread out below them. 3 days until the coronation. 3 days until they made it official. 3 days until the real fight began. But tonight, they had this moment. And that was enough. The night before the coronation, Elara couldn't sleep. She stood at the window of her chambers, no longer the small room in Mara's boarding house, but a suite in the fortress with tapestries and carved furniture and every luxury she'd once taken for granted. Yet somehow, it felt less like a cage than her father's estate ever had. Maybe because she'd chosen to be here. The city below was quiet, the celebrations from earlier finally dying down. In a few hours, the sun would rise. The coronation would begin, and she would become queen in front of the entire kingdom. Not queen consort, not a decoration on the throne. Queen, equal partner, co-ruler. The woman who'd run from a crown and then chosen to claim it on her own terms. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in." Kael entered, still dressed despite the late hour. His eyes found hers immediately, and she felt the bond between them pulse with warmth. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Too much to do. Corvin found 3 more potential threats in the guest list. We've moved them to monitored seating." He crossed to stand beside her at the window. "How are you?" "Terrified, excited, nauseous." She smiled. "The usual." "Second thoughts?" "About you?" "Never." "About becoming the most visible target in the kingdom?" She tilted her head. "Maybe a few." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You know what tomorrow means. Not just for us, but for everyone watching. Every girl trapped in a contract she didn't choose. Every woman told she has no power. Every person who's been ground down by the system. I know. If we fail, if we can't make this work, we won't fail." She turned to face him fully. "Because we're not doing this alone. We have the Daughter's Guard, the new council, the people who've already started rebuilding their lives." Her voice strengthened. "And we have each other." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so gentle, so at odds with the fearsome king the nobles had painted him as. "I don't say it enough," he said quietly, "but you changed everything. You changed me. You were already changing. I just gave you a reason to stop hiding it." "No, you gave me hope." His hand cupped her face. "For years, I fought alone. Wore the monster's mask because it was easier than showing weakness. Pushed everyone away because closeness meant vulnerability." His thumb brushed her cheek. "And then you ran into my camp, desperate and brave and absolutely refusing to give up. And I remembered what I'd been fighting for in the first place." Tears stung her eyes. "Kael, I love you, Elara Vance. Not because you're going to be queen, not because the bond ties us together, but because you saw me, the real me, and didn't run screaming in the other direction." She laughed through the tears. "I did literally run screaming away from you that first night." "Fair point," he smiled. "But you came back." "I had no choice. You were the only shelter for miles."
Still counts. She pulled him down, kissing him with everything she couldn't put into words. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "Tomorrow changes everything," she whispered. "Tomorrow makes official what's already true." "And what's that?" "That we're in this together, no matter what comes next." They stood there in the darkness, the city sleeping below them, the weight of tomorrow pressing down like a physical thing. But they weren't afraid. Not anymore. Dawn broke clear and cold. The fortress came alive with organized chaos, servants rushing through corridors, guards taking positions, officials reviewing protocols one last time. The coronation would take place in the Great Square, not the throne room. Kael had insisted. This wasn't just about the crown. It was about the people. And the people needed to see it. Elara dressed in layers of silk and armor. Literally. The gown was beautiful, deep blue like midnight, but beneath it she wore thin leather armor. Protection against blades, against arrows, against the very real possibility that someone would try to kill them today. Mara helped her with the final adjustments, her weathered hands gentle despite their roughness. "You look like a queen," the older woman said. "I look terrified." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." Mara stepped back, studying her. "But you also look ready, and that's what matters." "Ready for what?" "To stand in front of thousands of people and promise to lead them when I barely know what I'm doing? Ready to stand up and say you belong there, not because you were born to it, but because you fought for it." Mara's expression softened. "That's worth more than any bloodline." A knock at the door, Corvin's voice. "It's time, my lady." Elara took a deep breath, squeezed Mara's hand once, then walked out to meet her future. The great square was packed. Thousands of people filled every inch of space, commoners pressed against merchants, farmers standing beside craftsmen, former servants sharing space with minor nobles who'd proven their loyalty. The Daughters' Guard formed a protective ring around the dais, their armor gleaming, their expressions fierce. And at the center of it all, on a raised platform beneath the morning sun, stood Kael. He wore full royal regalia for the first time since Elara had met him. Dark armor etched with silver, a cloak that seemed to absorb light, the crown of the Alpha Kings resting on his dark hair. He looked every inch the powerful, dangerous ruler the rumors had painted, but when his eyes found hers across the square, they softened. That was for her alone. Elara walked through the crowd, flanked by guards, feeling the weight of thousands of gazes on her. Some looked hopeful, some suspicious, some openly hostile. She kept her head high and her steps steady. When she reached the dais, Kael extended his hand. She took it, and together they turned to face the kingdom. The high priest, one of the few old guard who'd proven trustworthy, stepped forward with the ceremonial crown. Smaller than Kael's, but no less significant. It gleamed gold and silver in the morning light. "People of the realm," the priest's voice carried across the square. "We gather today to witness a new beginning. To crown not just a king, for he already wears his crown, but a queen who comes to us not through bloodline or contract, but through choice." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elara Vance chose to run from a fate she did not want, chose to survive when survival seemed impossible, chose to stand beside a king when standing alone would have been safer. The priest's gaze moved over the assembled masses, and in doing so, she became a symbol of freedom, of courage, of the truth that our worth is not determined by who we're born to, but by who we choose to become. He lifted the crown. "Elara Vance, do you accept the weight of this crown, the responsibility of leadership, the burden of making choices that will affect thousands of lives?" Her throat was tight, but her voice was steady. "I do." "Do you swear to serve the people of this kingdom, to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves, to uphold justice even when it is difficult, and mercy even when it is unpopular?" "I do." "Do you swear to stand with your king, not beneath him, but beside him, as equal, as partner, as the one who shares both power and burden?" She looked at Kael, at the man who'd been a stranger, then a teacher, then a revelation, the man who'd given her freedom even when it cost him everything. "I do." The priest placed the crown on her head. The weight was lighter than she'd expected, but the meaning behind it was heavier than anything she'd ever carried. "Then by the power vested in me,
and by the will of the people, I declare you Elara Aldrich Thorn, Queen of the Northern Realm. May your reign be just, your heart be strong, and your courage never falter." The square erupted. Some cheered, some remained silent, but everyone watched as Kyle took her hand again, lifted it high. "My queen," he said simply, loudly enough for all to hear. "My equal, my choice." And then, breaking every protocol, every tradition, he pulled her close and kissed her. The crowd's reaction was mixed, gasps, cheers, scandalized whispers, but Elara didn't care. Because this moment of claiming each other in front of the entire kingdom was what freedom actually looked like. Not the absence of responsibility, but the ability to choose which responsibilities to carry. The celebration should have been the end of it, but Elara had learned by now that power never surrendered quietly. The feast was held in the great hall, tables stretching the length of the massive room, filled with people from every walk of life. Commoners sat beside former nobles. Merchants shared wine with farmers. The daughter's guard stood at intervals, vigilant. Elara moved through the crowd with Kyle, greeting guests, listening to concerns, making promises she intended to keep. Her crown felt strange on her head, foreign but not unwelcome. She was speaking with a group of former trafficked girls who'd traveled from Kelmar when she felt it. A disturbance, a shift in the energy of the room. Her hand went to the knife hidden in the folds of her gown, Kyle's training kicking in automatically. She scanned the crowd, looking for the threat, and found Lord Ferris pushing through the masses, his face red with rage and wine, a blade gleaming in his hand. "Traitor!" he screamed. "You've destroyed us! Destroyed everything!" He lunged toward Kale. Three things happened simultaneously. Corvin moved to intercept, his hand on his sword. The daughter's guard converged, weapons drawn, and Elara stepped between Ferris and Kale, her own knife flashing up to catch his descending blade. The clash of steel rang through the hall. Silence fell like a hammer. Ferris stared at her, shock replacing rage. You can't. Women don't what?" Elara's voice was cold. "Fight? Defend ourselves? Refuse to be victims?" She twisted her wrist, disarming him with a move Kyle had taught her weeks ago. His blade clattered to the floor. "You're wrong." Guards surrounded Ferris, forcing him to his knees. But Elara didn't step back. She stood over him, her blade still drawn, her crown glinting in the firelight. "You represent everything we're changing," she said quietly, loud enough for the room to hear. The old order that believed power came from oppression, that strength meant crushing those beneath you, that women and commoners and anyone outside the noble class were tools to be used and discarded. She sheathed her knife. "But that world is dying, and you're dying with it." Ferris spit at her feet. "You'll fail. The people will turn on you. They'll realize they need us." "They need justice," Kyle said, stepping up beside Elara. "They need fairness. They need leaders who see them as people, not resources." His voice carried across the hall. "And if we fail to give them that, then yes, they should turn on us. Because that's what accountability looks like." He gestured to the guards. "Take him to the cells. He'll stand trial with the others." As Ferris was dragged away, still screaming curses, Elara turned to the assembled crowd. Hundreds of faces stared back at her, shocked, awed, uncertain. "I'm not a warrior," she said. Her voice was steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "I'm not a trained fighter. Until 3 months ago, I'd never held a weapon, never defended myself, never had to." She touched her crown. "But I learned, because I had to. Because the alternative was surrender." Her gaze swept the room. "Every single one of you has that same strength. The ability to learn, to fight, to refuse to accept a world that treats you as less than human." Silence. Heavy and waiting. "That's what this new kingdom is built on," she continued. "Not bloodlines or old money or who your ancestors were, but on the choice to be better, to do better, to build something that our children won't have to run from." For a moment, nothing happened. Then someone started clapping. A woman in the back, one of the daughters of freedom. The applause spread, slowly at first, then building like a wave. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet, the sound of their approval drowning out everything else. Elara's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. This was victory. Not defeating Ferris, not wearing a crown, but standing in a room full of people who'd been broken by the old system and watching them choose to believe in something new. Wow. Late that night, after the guests had finally dispersed and the hall had been cleared, Elara found herself back on the battlements with Kael. The city below was dark and quiet. Most of the celebration fires burned down to embers. "You disarmed Ferris," Kael said, a note of pride in his voice. "You taught me well." "I taught you basics. You made them deadly." She leaned against the stone wall, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "Do you think it's always going to be like this? Constant threats? Constant fighting?" "For a while, yes." He moved to stand beside her. "Change is violent. The old guard won't surrender without a fight. There will be more assassination attempts, more rebellions, more nobles like Ferris who'd rather destroy everything than give up their power." Comforting. "But," he continued, "it will get better, slowly. Each generation will be raised with different values. The children growing up now won't remember the old system. They'll only know this one. And if we're not around to see it?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then we make sure the foundation is strong enough to survive without us. That's the whole point. Building something bigger than ourselves." Elara thought about that. About the Daughter's Guard, already training new recruits. About the Reformed Council, learning to govern without corruption. About the laws being rewritten, the contracts being abolished, the cages being dismantled one by one. "We're actually doing it," she said softly. "Changing the kingdom. We're trying. The real test comes in the years ahead, when the initial momentum fades, when governing becomes routine instead of revolutionary." He looked at her. "That's when most reforms fail, when people get comfortable and slip back into old patterns. Then we don't let them get comfortable." He smiled. "There's the Queen I know." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the bond between them humming with contentment. Elara's hand drifted to her crown, still strange on her head. "I never wanted this," she said quietly. "I know. I just wanted to be free." "I know that too. But now that I have it," she paused, searching for the right words. "Now I can't imagine giving it up. Not the crown, but the ability to make things better, to use this power for something that matters. That's the difference between you and the old nobles," Kael said. "They wanted power for its own sake. You want it as a tool. Is that enough? Wanting to help? It's a start. The rest is action, and you've already proven you're willing to act." Movement below caught their attention. A messenger running across the courtyard, torches lighting as guards mobilized. Kael's expression hardened. That's never good. They descended quickly, meeting Corvin in the main hall. The envoy's face was grim. "We have a situation. Messengers from the Eastern Territories. There's been an uprising." "Ferris's allies?" Kael asked. "No, common people. Farmers. They've seized the local lord's manor. They're demanding land reform. Redistribution of property." Corvin hesitated. "They're invoking your reforms, saying if women can break contracts, so can they. That if the old laws are void, then so are the ones tying them to land they can never own." Silence fell. Elara's mind raced. This was exactly what they'd wanted, people standing up for themselves, demanding justice. But it was also chaos, uncontrolled, potentially violent. "How many?" Kael asked. "Thousands, and spreading. Other territories are watching. If we don't respond carefully, it could spark civil war," Elara finished. "Or," Kael said slowly, "it could be the final push we need." Both Elara and Corvin stared at him. "You want to support a peasant uprising?" Corvin's voice was carefully controlled. "Your Majesty, that's exactly what this kingdom needs." Kael's eyes were bright with something that looked almost like excitement. "We've been reforming from the top down, changing laws, rewriting contracts, but real change, lasting change, needs to come from the bottom up too." "So you're just going to let them seize property? Overthrow local lords?" Corvin shook his head. "That's anarchy. That's revolution." Kael turned to Elara. "What do you think?" She thought about the girls in Kelmar, about the women who'd escaped trafficking, about everyone who'd been told they had no power and then discovered they'd had it all along. "I think we ride east," she said, "and we help them." They left at dawn with 100 guards and members of the new council. The journey took 3 days, and with each mile they passed more signs of upheaval. Abandoned manor houses, overturned carts bearing noble crests, farmers armed with pitchforks and scythes, marching toward the eastern territories. The revolution was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. When they reached the heart of the uprising, a town called Redwater, they found thousands of people gathered in the fields outside the seized manor. Makeshift camps sprawled across the landscape. Banners made from scraps of cloth proclaimed "Land for the landless" and "End serfdom now." At the center of it all, standing on an overturned wagon, was a woman in her 40s with iron gray hair and a voice like thunder. "And we will not surrender what we've claimed," she was shouting as Elara and Kale approached. "This land was stolen from our ancestors. We've worked it for generations, bled for it, died for it, and now we take it back." The crowd roared approval. Kale dismounted, gesturing for the others to stay back. Elara followed his lead, and together they walked through the crowd toward the wagon. People parted for them, recognition rippling through the masses. Whispers, "The king, the queen. They're here." The woman on the wagon, the clear leader, stopped mid-speech when she saw them. For a moment, fear flashed across her face. Then she lifted her chin, defiant. "Your Majesty," she said, the title sharp. "Come to put down the rebellion." "No," Kyle said simply. "Come to understand it." That clearly wasn't the answer she'd expected. Understand what? That your reforms didn't go far enough? That breaking marriage contracts means nothing if we're still chained to land we can never own? "You're right." Stunned silence. The woman blinked. What?" "You're right," Kale repeated, louder this time. "The reforms didn't go far enough. I focused on the most visible injustices: trafficking, forced marriages, legal slavery. But I missed the foundation. The feudal system that keeps people trapped in poverty, generation after generation." The crowd was utterly silent now, every eye fixed on their king. "What's your name?" Elara asked the woman. "Mira. Mira Blackwood." "Mira, how long have you and your family worked this land?" 4 generations, maybe 5. We lost count." "And in all that time, did you ever own it? Ever have the right to sell it, to leave it, to pass it to your children as yours?" Mira's jaw tightened. "No, we were tied to it. The Lord owned the land. We just existed on it." Elara turned to the crowd. "How many of you have similar stories?" Thousands of hands went up. "And you're willing to fight for the right to change that?" "Yes!" The shout came from hundreds of throats. Elara looked at Kyle, saw the decision forming in his eyes even before he spoke. He climbed onto the wagon beside Mira, his voice carrying across the field. "Then fight you shall, but not against me. With me." He paused, letting that sink in. "I'm issuing a new proclamation, effective immediately. All feudal land rights are abolished. Farmers who've worked land for more than 10 years have the right to claim ownership. Lords who resist will be stripped of their titles and property." The silence shattered into chaos. Shouts of disbelief, joy, fear, anger, all mixing together into a roar that shook the ground. Corvin pushed forward through the crowd. "Your Majesty, you can't. The nobles will never accept." "The nobles don't have a choice." Kale's voice was iron. "This is the future. They can adapt or they can leave. This is too much too fast. Is it?" Elara stepped up beside Kale on the wagon. "Or have we just been moving too slowly? These people have waited generations. How much longer should they wait?" Mira stared at them both, tears streaming down her weathered face. "You mean it? Truly?" "Truly," Kyle said. "But understand, this won't be easy. The nobles will fight back. There will be violence. Some of you will die defending what I'm giving you the right to claim." "We know," Mira said quietly. "We've always known. But better to die free than live in chains." Kale nodded slowly. Then he drew his sword, not in threat, but in salute. "Then consider this my declaration. The age of lords and serfs is over. In its place we build something new. A kingdom where your worth is determined by your work, not your birth. Where land belongs to those who tend it. Where every person has the right to determine their own future." He raised the sword high. "Who stands with me?" The response was deafening. Thousands of voices, united in a single word. We do, das. The rebellion became a reformation. Over the next weeks, Kael and Elara traveled the kingdom, meeting with groups of farmers, craftsmen, merchants, all the people who'd been voiceless under the old system. They drafted new laws, established councils, created systems for land transfer that didn't rely on noble approval. It was messy, chaotic, sometimes violent when nobles tried to resist, but it worked. Slowly, painfully, the kingdom began to reshape itself, not through royal decree alone, but through the collective will of thousands of people who decided they deserved better. The Daughters' Guard expanded, now including men, the sons of freedom, who'd been trapped in their own ways by the old system. Together, they enforced the new laws, protected the vulnerable, and ensured that the powerful couldn't simply recreate the old hierarchies under new names. Resistance came, as Kael had predicted. 3 major noble houses tried to raise armies. They were defeated, not by royal forces, but by the very people they'd tried to control, rising up to defend their newfound rights. The message was clear. The old order was dead. Long live the new. 6 months after the coronation, Elara stood in the Great Hall reviewing reports from across the kingdom. Literacy programs in the Western Territories, medical clinics in the South, the first elected councils forming in the Eastern provinces. Slow progress, but progress nonetheless. Kael entered, looking exhausted but satisfied. The last of the resistant noble houses has capitulated. Lord Harrow just signed the land transfer documents, voluntarily, after his own servants threatened to burn his manor down if he didn't. Kael's smile was tired. I'd call that voluntary enough, Elara laughed. We're actually doing it, rebuilding the whole kingdom. We are, though I suspect historians will argue for centuries about whether it was brilliant or insane. Can it be both? Probably will be. He moved to stand beside her, looking at the maps spread across the table. How are you holding up? Exhausted, terrified, exhilarated. She met his eyes. The usual. Do you regret it? Any of it? She thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, polished, obedient, invisible, sold to a monster she'd never met. And she thought about who she was now, queen, reformer, fighter, woman who'd chosen her own path and then used that choice to open paths for others. Not for a second, she said. He pulled her close, and they stood there surrounded by maps and reports and the weight of a kingdom in transition. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For running, for refusing to give up, for showing me that change was possible. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. For choosing me when you had every reason not to. You gave me freedom. How could I not choose you? I gave you a chance. You created the freedom yourself. She smiled. Then we're even. Not even close. He kissed her forehead. But we have a lifetime to figure out the balance. A year after the coronation, they held the First People's Assembly. Representatives from every territory, every guild, every community gathered in the capital to discuss the kingdom's future. Not nobles appointed by blood, but people elected by their communities. Kael and Elara opened the proceedings not with commands or decrees, but with questions. What does the kingdom need? How can we serve you better? What are we missing? For 3 days, the assembly debated, argued, collaborated, and when they finally emerged with a charter of rights and responsibilities, it bore the marks of compromise and collective wisdom. No single voice dominated, no single vision imposed. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely revolutionary. On the final night, as the delegates celebrated in the streets below, Elara and Kael returned to the battlements, their refuge, their place of truth. We did it, Elara said softly. We actually rebuilt the kingdom. We started to rebuild it, Kael corrected. This is just the beginning. The real work will take generations. But the foundation is solid. Thanks to you. She turned to look at him. Thanks to us. You started this long before I ran into your camp. I just helped you remember why you were fighting. You did more than that. He took her hands. You showed the kingdom that change was possible, that someone could break free and not just survive but thrive, that cages could be shattered and something better built from the pieces. We shattered them together. Together, he agreed. Below them, the city glowed with celebration. Above them, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. And between them, the bond hummed with contentment and love, and the shared understanding that they'd found something most people spent lifetimes searching for: partnership, equality, choice. What happens now? Elara asked. Now we keep going, keep building, keep proving that a kingdom built on freedom and justice can survive. And if we fail, then at least we failed trying for something that mattered. He pulled her closer. But we won't fail, because we have something the old order never did. What's that? Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that's just fear in disguise, but the steady, enduring hope that comes from people choosing their own destiny. Elara leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his body, the strength of the bond between them, the weight of the crown on her head that she'd learned to wear with pride instead of resentment. I love you, she said, my impossible, idealistic, revolutionary king. I love you too, he replied. My fierce, unstoppable, absolutely terrifying queen. They stood together on the battlements as the celebration continued below, as the kingdom they'd fought for breathed and grew and became something new, as the future unfolded before them, uncertain but full of possibility. The girl who'd run from a cage had become a woman who broke them. The king who'd worn a monster's mask had found someone who saw through it. And together, they'd proven that the most powerful force in any kingdom wasn't fear or tradition or bloodline. It was choice. The choice to run, the choice to fight, the choice to build something better from the ashes of what came before. The choice to love freely, to rule justly, to stand together against a world that said it couldn't be done. And most importantly, the choice to never, ever stop trying. Years later, when historians wrote about the Reformation, they would call it the bloodless revolution. Though that wasn't quite true. There had been blood, violence, loss. But compared to what it could have been, what it should have been by all precedent, it was remarkably peaceful. They would debate the wisdom of such rapid change, question whether Kael and Elara had moved too fast, pushed too hard, demanded too much, but they couldn't deny the results. A kingdom transformed, a people freed, a system rebuilt from the ground up based not on who ruled, but on what ruled: justice, equality, the fundamental belief that every person deserved the right to choose their own path. The Daughters' Guard became a permanent institution, expanded to protect all vulnerable people regardless of gender. The land reforms created a new middle class of property-owning farmers. The elected councils gave voice to communities that had been silent for generations. It wasn't perfect. Nothing built by humans ever was. But it was better. And better was enough. Elara and Kael ruled together for 30 years. Long enough to see their reforms take root. Long enough to watch a generation grow up knowing nothing of the old system. Long enough to ensure that when they finally stepped down, the kingdom they left behind was stronger than the one they'd inherited. They had no children, a choice they made together, understanding that the kingdom needed leaders chosen for ability, not blood. Instead, they mentored dozens of young reformers, trained new councils, ensured that the transition of power would be peaceful and democratic. When Elara finally removed her crown for the last time, passing it to the newly elected head of council, she felt no regret. She'd never wanted to be queen, but she'd wanted to be free. And in fighting for that freedom, for herself, for others, for an entire kingdom, she'd found something more valuable than any crown. Purpose, partnership, peace. The girl who'd run from a gilded cage had learned that true freedom wasn't the absence of responsibility. It was the ability to choose which responsibilities to carry, and she'd carried them well. Go. On a quiet evening decades after the coronation, an old woman sat in a garden of wild roses, watching the sun set over a city she'd helped transform. Beside her, an old man with silver hair and a scar on his jaw held her hand. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. "Everything we built?" "Does anything last forever?" he replied. "Eventually, future generations will face their own challenges, make their own choices, build their own futures." "That's not very comforting. It's honest." He squeezed her hand. "But I think the foundation will hold. Because we didn't build it alone. We built it with thousands of people who understood what freedom cost and chose to pay that price." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "No regrets? About us?" "Never." He smiled. "About the kingdom?" "A few. I moved too fast sometimes, pushed when I should have persuaded, made choices that hurt people even when I was trying to help them. That's leadership. Imperfect people making imperfect choices. Is that wisdom or resignation?" "Both." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "But we tried. That's what matters. We saw cages and broke them, saw injustice and fought it, saw a better future and built toward it even when everyone said it was impossible." "We did," he agreed. "Together." "Together," she echoed. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Around them, the garden bloomed wild and free. No careful cultivation, no forced symmetry, just life growing as it chose. Much like the kingdom they'd fought for. In the distance, bells rang, celebrating something, mourning something, marking time in the way bells always had. But the sound was different now. Not commanding, not controlling, just present. A reminder that life continued, that people endured, that hope persisted even in the darkest times. The runaway bride and the mad king had become something new, two people who'd found each other in desperation and built something lasting from that first desperate choice. They'd proven that cages could be broken, that systems could change, that love freely given was stronger than any bond forged in desperation. And most importantly, they'd shown that the girl who refused the cage and the king who gave her the key could become something greater together than either could have been alone. Not ruler and subject, not captor and captive, but equals, partners. Two people who'd chosen each other, chosen freedom, chosen to fight for a better world. And in making that choice, they'd changed everything. The sun set, the stars emerged. The city below glowed with life and possibility. And in a garden of wild roses, two people who'd survived the impossible sat together, holding hands, watching the future they'd fought for unfold before them.